next item is item 11, the Stage 4 debate on the Building Safety Wales Bill, and I call on the Cabinet Secretary to move the motion. Jane Bryant.
Llywydd, I'm sure none of us needs to be reminded that the origins of this bill are in the dreadful events of the 14th of June 2017, when 72 people lost their lives in the fire at Grenfell Tower. In response to that tragedy, we set out to deliver a new building safety regime for the benefit of residents of shared buildings across Wales, regardless of building height or tenure. Three key principles are fundamental to this bill. First is safety. While we can never eliminate all risks, we can significantly enhance safety by identifying risks and ensuring that these risks are properly managed. Through doing so, people are safer and feel safer at home. The second principle is accountability. The legislation will end any confusion about who is answerable for managing building safety risks. We will ensure that those responsible for buildings are held to account in law for their safety. The third principle is resident voice. Residents are fundamental to this regime. Their experiences and concerns must be heard and addressed. We will empower residents with clear routes of redress and a stronger voice in matters that affect their home. We recognise from the outset that reform on this scale is complex and time-consuming. The result is one of the largest bills ever to be considered by this Senedd. It is far broader in its scope and ambition than the equivalent legislation in England. And I am convinced that this is the bill we need if safety is truly to be our guiding principle. Many partners have contributed to getting this bill to this stage, and I must thank my predecessors, Julie James and Hannah Blythin, for doing so much of the groundwork, and Welsh Government officials who have worked so hard and for such a long time, determined to get the technical details right. I'm grateful to the chairs, members of the Senedd committees that have scrutinised the bill so thoroughly. In particular, my thanks to Rhys Owen and Sian Gwenllian, who have championed the concerns of leaseholders with determination, and to Joel James and to Lee Waters for their insightful challenge and constructive work. All four have shown a willingness to work with me to find solutions. The Llywydd told us last week's debate, where we unanimously agreed a whole series of complex amendments, was a Senedd first. It was achieved by hard work by many people and a willingness to compromise. Thank you to all involved. It showed what we can do when we choose to work together to achieve a common aim, politics at its best. Huge thanks must also go to the housing sector, to local government and to the fire and rescue services for engaging so enthusiastically, for supporting our aims and for giving us the benefit of their insight and their expertise. And finally, I must thank the residents and leaseholders who have shared their lived experience with us, and organisations like TPAS Cymru who have helped to give them a voice. In particular, to Diana and her partner Terry. Diana invited me into her home so that I could hear about the work Merthyr Valley's homes have done to ensure she feels safe. It was clear to me during that visit how seriously building safety was taken, and also how important the engagement of residents was. That's what this bill will ensure, and that's a legacy this Senedd can be proud of. Of course, we continue to feel the effects of the Grenfell Tower tragedy, and as a government, we remain focused on ensuring all the recommendations of the Grenfell Tower inquiry are implemented. Today, we have published a report on the progress being made. I feel deeply for people who are still waiting for remediation of their buildings and experiencing the stress and expense that can come with that. But I'm also aware that the logistical challenges of getting remediation work done are real. We have proactively supported residents by putting in place contracts with developers, and we continue to do everything possible to remove barriers to progress. I understand and share the frustration of residents, and I hope the next Welsh Government will bring forward a remediation bill to further support leaseholders. Much work remains to implement the new building safety regime, but by passing this bill today, we can take a huge step forward so that the people of Wales are safe in their homes. Diolch.
Joel James.
Thank you, Claude, and I'd like to start by outlining that the Welsh Conservatives will be supporting Building Safety Bill at Stage 4, I should say, sorry. I want to thank the Cabinet Secretary for the constructive engagement we've had throughout this process. The Cabinet Secretary and our office have been quick to engage with me, particularly in the discussions we've had between the stages, and that has been genuinely appreciated. I would also like to thank those stakeholders who were able to contribute evidence and consider amendments throughout the bill stages. I feel that this legislation has been a long time coming, given as we have heard that the Grenfell Tower fire that sadly killed so many people was almost 9 years ago. And I think we all would have liked to have seen this legislation come much sooner. As I've previously mentioned, I've been concerned that the construction industry were not given the opportunity to contribute to the evidence sessions. And I believe that this is a missed opportunity, especially since concerns have been raised by the potential impact on housing supply and the property market, whereby increased regulatory burdens and uncertainty over liability could slow development, affect the saleability and the ability to remortgage some properties. Though we have worked constructively to try and address a number of issues raised during scrutiny, I still believe one of the biggest limiting factors to the success of this legislation will be capacity. In particular, whether we actually have enough qualified fire safety and building professionals to deliver the new regime effectively. At present, there are real concerns that the sector simply does not have the workforce needed to meet the demands that this legislation will place upon it. This issue of capacity does not only apply to professionals delivering the regime, but also to those responsible for enforcing it. Local authorities are already under significant pressure, and they will play a key role in enforcing these new requirements. It is therefore important that proper consideration is given to ensure that they have the resources and support necessary to take on those additional responsibilities. In addition to those concerns around capacity and enforcement, questions also remain about the amount of detail that will be set out later through secondary legislation. While that is understandable to an extent, it does create uncertainty for landlords, housing providers, residents and developers who will be trying to prepare for the new system. Finally, I'd like to say that while there are still areas where questions remain, the principles behind this legislation are important, and we all share the objective of ensuring that people in Wales are able to live in homes that are safe, secure and properly regulated. Thank you, Clara.
Sian Gwenllian.
Thank you, Llywydd. The fact that the Senedd has accepted all of the amendments tabled during stage 3 of this bill is an indication of the detailed collaboration that has taken place over recent months, and it's a sign of the maturity of the debate in the Senedd. We now have a bill that will strengthen the building safety system for the future, and that also addresses, to an extent, the need to speed up the work of remediating existing buildings. Accountability and the voice of residents are important elements of this legislation. This legislation does go further than what is in place in England, and that is something to be welcomed. This includes new regulation on building safety that encompasses assessment and management of building safety risks while a residential building is occupied. This regulation would apply to all residential buildings containing at least 2 units, while in England, only high-risk buildings that are at least 18 metres high or at least 7 stories high fall within the scope of the regulation. So the fact that we've taken a little longer in order to reach a point that includes more buildings is to be celebrated, I think. And the legislation places a duty on the Welsh Ministers to prepare and publish an annual report on progress made in carrying out remediation work in Wales. That is the work that has been set out in the government's contracts with developers or that has been funded by the Welsh Building Safety Fund. And residents who live in buildings that have been identified as those needing remediation have more power to hold developers to account and have better protection regarding increased service costs. And those were certainly issues that were a priority for us when we were discussing this legislation. It's almost 9 years since the horrific Grenfell tragedy, one of the biggest disasters of modern times, and yet far too many people live in fear that a similar tragedy will recur, with almost half of the buildings that have been identified for remediation still awaiting inspection or waiting for the commencement of the work. And the Local Government and Housing Committee heard powerful evidence from residents who are still living in fear since the Grenfell tragedy. And during stage 3, of course, at last, the government accepted that remediation was within the scope of the legislation. It was slightly disappointing that this happened so late in the day, and it will be at least another 9 months before some of the amendments on remediation can be implemented. And so I do understand the frustration of the residents and those who have been campaigning for these amendments. But I do really hope that the government will press ahead and will create these new regulations. There is a process around that, of course. There needs to be consultation and so forth, but certainly that work needs to start now. And we shouldn't wait until the next Senedd. And I do hope greatly that that will happen, and I certainly will hold the current Cabinet Secretary to account on that. And I will also be encouraging the next government to get on with the work immediately. Thank you.
Diolch, Llywydd. To many of the residents surrounding us today, they'll see this as an historic moment. Of course, we share the frustration that it's taken nearly 9 years to reach this point, but I'm so pleased that the bill has arrived at its final stages before the Senedd election. Why is this legislation so important? Well, the final report on the Hackett Review, which was published back in May 2018, found that the regulatory system covering high-rise and complex buildings is simply not fit for purpose. The All Wales Housing Expert Panel noted that the current system of fire safety risk assessments is not all-encompassing and, again, not fit for purpose. And the fire safety order is based on commercial premises, so it doesn't concentrate on residential dwellings. We know that currently the responsibilities are unclear, adherence is inconsistent, and residents have the lack of access to justice to enforce basic rights. The evidence was clear that a regime with stronger responsibilities and rights is required urgently, so to improve the safety of those living in multi-occupied residential properties across Wales. And that bill does deliver that. There are numerous important aspects, such as the fact that every building in the 3 categories will now have an individual with responsibility for safety, a record of building safety information, the golden thread, and a fire safety risk assessment undertaken by a competent person, which has to be reviewed annually. I welcome, too, that the requirements for Category 1 buildings include the need to have a resident engagement strategy, and that is so important. And maybe a lot of the issues we've had in the past is because residents don't feel listened to. And it's so important that we now have a process for investigating complaints. At heart, this will enable relevant stakeholders to have a say in decisions of relevance to their own building safety, to their own homes. It gets to grips with the finding of the Hackett Review that there needs to be better communication about safety between landlord or property owners and the residents themselves. We must remember that it's the lives of every person, child, family living in such buildings that need to be at the forefront of our minds and the minds of all who are involved with multi-occupied residential properties. That's what has inspired me since holding my first meeting as a Senedd member back in May 2021 with a resident from Victoria Wharf. And at last, after years of campaigning by the Welsh Cladded and other building safety victims, remediation is now part of the bill. And I'm so grateful, Cabinet Secretary, for that. There is now a clear route for residents to bring cases before the Residential Property Tribunal for remediation orders and remediation contribution orders. But as the Cabinet Secretary knows well, 9 months is the longest amount of time this or the next Welsh Government has to introduce the required regulations. Now, victims of the opinion and the experience of Westminster proves that 9 months is not required. I believe that the Welsh Government and the Senedd can deliver sooner, and such action must be prioritised. Nonetheless, I am so pleased to be able to acknowledge today that this bill strengthens rights, strengthens voices, and more importantly, and this is such a basic human right, strengthens the homes of so many people in our communities. Thank you to all the people who've contributed for so long, who've battled for so long to this genuinely invaluable process. Diolch yn fawr.
The Cabinet Secretary to reply.
Just move to the vote.
Iawn,
In accordance with Standing Order 26.50C, a recorded vote must be taken on stage 4 motions. So I will defer voting on this item until voting time. Items 12 and 13 are next, and unless a member objects, both motions under items 12 and 13, namely the final stage of the Planning Wales Bill and the finding stage of the Planning Consequential Provisions Wales Bill, will be grouped for debate but with votes taken separately. I don't believe there are any objections, so I call on the Counsel General to move the motions. Julie James.
Diolch, Llywydd. Today, the Planning Wales Bill and the Planning Consequential Provisions Wales Bill are before the Senedd for final consideration, and I am very grateful to members for our constructive debates and for the clear support shown for progressing both bills. That support now allows us to take an important step towards realising their benefits. For decades, planning legislation in Wales has been dispersed across many acts, layered with amendments that have created growing complexity. If the Senedd passes these bills today, it will mark an important and decisive milestone. For the first time, professionals, local authorities and the public will be able to access the full body of Welsh planning law in both languages in one coherent code. The Planning Wales Bill draws the principal legislation together and restates it in clear, modern and bilingual language. This will make the system more accessible and better able to deliver positive outcomes across Wales. Stakeholders recognise these benefits during scrutiny and strongly supported the significant step forward these bills provide. It is also important to recognise the vital purpose of the Planning Consequential Provisions Wales Bill. By updating, aligning and repealing provisions spread across multiple decades of legislation, it ensures that the new code operates smoothly from the moment it comes into force. Without it, the clarity achieved through the Planning Wales Bill would be undermined by inconsistencies elsewhere in the statute book. And Llywydd, these bills also mark a significant step in Wales's wider devolution journey. By separating Welsh planning law from legislation passed by the UK Parliament, these bills establish an accessible and clear legal framework that is uniquely designed for Wales. The terminology and references now used much more accurately reflect the operational intent and effect of the planning system. The bills replace decades of fragmentation with clarity, and as a result, those who operate, use and engage in the planning system will be able to access and understand the law that applies to them. Looking ahead, passing these bills today will do more than simply tidy our statute book. They lay the firm foundations for our future. The Planning Wales Bill provides a clear platform from which reforms to the planning system can be taken forward. By modernising and consolidating planning law into a single accessible code, future reforms will not only be easier to shape, but far clearer for everyone to understand and scrutinise. Llywydd, I want to place on record my gratitude to all those who have brought us to this point. I particularly want to acknowledge the Law Commission for its report on planning law in Wales. The bills are in no small part the product of its meticulous and independent analysis, and this continues the strong partnership between the Welsh Government and the Law Commission in our shared mission to modernise and rationalise Welsh law. I'd also like to thank the Legislation, Justice and Constitution Committee for its constructive and rigorous scrutiny of both bills. And my sincere thanks also extend to stakeholders across the planning, environmental and legal communities who provided expert evidence to the committee. And so I'd particularly like to acknowledge the valuable contributions of the Senedd Commission staff working hard behind the scenes. I very much thank them for all of their efforts in getting us to where we are today. And finally, I want to pay tribute to the Bill team. Their extraordinary commitment, technical expertise and sustained hard work have been instrumental in steering this highly technical and complex consolidation exercise to this stage. Their efforts will continue as we move into the implementation stage to ensure a smooth transition to the new legislative framework which will underpin the planning system in Wales. Diolch.
Joel James.
Thank you, Clywyd. As we have heard, there is clear need for this legislation because the planning system in Wales has undoubtedly become too slow and complex, often delaying much-needed housing and infrastructure projects, which has affected residents and families throughout the country. I really hope that one of the key aims of the bill to make planning decisions faster and more efficient by introducing clearer procedures and timelines and by helping to reduce unnecessary delays in the planning process will manifest in improved construction timelines. Welsh Conservatives believe that a more efficient and predictable planning system is important for supporting economic growth, something the Welsh Labour Government has struggled with the last 26 years. But moving forward with greater certainty for developers and investors should help to unlock new development and support wider economic opportunities. As such, we will be supporting. Thank you.
And cefnogi.
We will be supporting these two bills at their final stage. We welcome the central aim to simplify and consolidate planning law in Wales. For the first time, there will be a full body of planning law in Wales which will exist in one coordinated act. That is a very important step forward and one that has been too long in the making. The current system has evolved through many layers of legislation, many of the pieces of legislation from Westminster, which has created confusion at times. Bringing these provisions together in one place will provide greater clarity and assurance to everyone who is involved in the planning system, local authorities, developers, communities, and decision makers alike. As we have said along the journey, there is always room for improvement in relation to any legislation, but the principle underpinning these bills is robust. This is not the end of planning reform, but it does provide a foundation for it. The clearer legal framework and more accessible framework should help to make the system more efficient, to support swifter decision-making and providing a stronger foundation for future governments to build upon. And this work will be needed to strengthen the voice of communities, to safeguard the environment, to support sustainable development, and to ensure that the Welsh language continues as a central factor in planning decisions, and that is strengthened. So although this bill won't resolve every challenge facing the planning system, it does give Wales something that we have needed for some time: a solid and coordinated foundation that the next Senedd can continue to reform. And for those reasons, we will be supporting these bills today.
The Consul General to reply.
Diolch, Llywydd. I just want to take the opportunity to once more thank all of the members who've played a significant role in this and to the staff of the Commission as well. And Llywydd, I just want to say that I'm really pleased as well that we've got the procedure for consolidation bills set out. So this bill is not only a historic moment for planning in Wales, it's an historic moment for the purpose of accessing Welsh law and codifying it for the future. So in the light of those remarks and in the knowledge that everybody around the Chamber has been supportive, I'm pleased to move the Planning Wales Bill and the Planning Consequential Provisions Wales Bill, and I urge members to lend their full support as we take this important step in consolidating, codifying and strengthening our statute book. Diolch.
Diolch I bawb.
I thank everyone for that. And in accordance with Standing Order 26C.64, recorded vote must be taken on the final stage motions. So we will vote during voting time. That brings us to voting time. And unless 3 members wish for the bell to be rung, I will proceed directly to voting time. So the first vote this afternoon is on item 7. These are the
Procurement Act 2023 Specified International Agreements Amendments Wales Regulations 2026, and I call for a vote on the motion. Table the name of Jane Hutt. Open the vote. Close the vote. In favour 52 abstentions and none against. Therefore, the motion is agreed. The next item is the legislative consent motion on the Crime and Policing Bill, and I call for a vote on the motion tabled in the name of Jane Hutt. Open the vote. Close the vote. In favour 25, no abstentions and 27 against. Therefore, the motion is not agreed. Item 11 is next, the Stage 4 of the Building Safety Wales Bill, and I call for a vote on the motion tabled in the name of Jane Bryant. Open the vote. Close the vote. In favour 52, no abstentions and none against. Therefore, the motion on the Building Safety Wales Bill is agreed. Item 12 is next, the final stage of the Planning Wales Bill. I call for a vote on the motion tabled in the name of Julie James. Open the vote. Close the vote. In favour 52, no abstentions and none against. Therefore, the final stage of the planning bill is agreed to. Item 13 is next, the final stage of the Planning Consequential Provisions Wales Bill, and I call for a vote on the motion tabled in the name of Julie James. Open the vote. Close the vote. In favour 52, no abstentions and none against. The motion is therefore agreed on the final stage of the Planning Consequential Provisions Wales Bill. That concludes voting for the time being. We will now take a short break and the bell will be rung 5 minutes before we reconvene for our Stage 3 deliberations.
We're now ready to start our Stage 3 proceedings on the prohibition of greyhound racing Wales Bill.
Stage 3 proceedings, though, on the prohibition of greyhound racing Wales Bill, members will be aware that this matter is the subject of active judicial review proceedings, and therefore Standing Order 13.15 applies. The standing orders are clear that the sub judice rules should not mean that the Senedd cannot legislate, or that the process of legislating should be prevented. The ability of the Senedd to consider amendments to the bill at Stage 3 proceedings today is not affected. So members should be advised not to comment directly on the proceedings, nor to make any comments about the merits of those proceedings at all. It is not in order to speculate on what the outcome of that case will be or ought to be. It is for the court to determine those issues. My group cynta.
The first group of amendments relates to the definition of greyhound racing. The lead amendment in this group is Amendment 3, and I call on Rhys ap Owen to move and speak to the lead amendment and the other amendments in the group.
Sorry, diolch yn fawr, Dirprwy Lywydd. This is a simple amendment to leave out around and to insert on, but it will make a big difference. As it stands, greyhound racing relates only to running around a track. However, in my view, this is a huge loophole which doesn't future-proof the bill. When I raised this at Stage 2, committee members opposite me stated that they thought the curvature of the track to be a defining characteristic and questioned the commercial viability of anything other than the current model in Wales. In response, the Deputy First Minister advised that the drafting reflects industry norms and conventions. However, it is viable to arrange straight track racing. All racing in Spain are done on straight tracks. Look at New Zealand, where a straight track has opened and is seeing active use as many as 12 races a day. They are learning from Australia, where straight track racing is firmly entrenched, within the weekly racing schedule. I read in preparation for tonight an article in the New Zealand Herald, which stated that last year on the straight track in New Zealand, a punter placed a bet of $30 on straight track races. He won around 780,000 New Zealand dollars. Clearly, the track doesn't have to be a round track for the betting sector. Also, straight track racing can even be more dangerous. Listen to what a Greyhound Board of Great Britain trainer said to the Rural Affairs and Islands Committee of the Scottish Parliament in March 2024. This is what they say. Straight tracks could have an adverse effect because a dog has to run faster in a straight line over 500 metres than it does when there is a bend. They do not keep up the speed on the bend, although they might get up to a good speed, but if they were to run flat out for 500 metres, there would be more chance of injury. As the Battersea Dogs and Cats Home told us, if the intention is to stop all greyhound racing in Wales, and that is the intention, we would suggest the bill looks beyond what is currently undertaken in Wales. My amendments would, as Cut the Chase Coalition described, act as a preventative measure in terms of the future facilitation of racing on straight and/or other shaped tracks in the future. Please support these common sense changes. Remove around and to change it with on, and to close one of these massive loopholes. Diolch yn fawr.
Rhys Griffith.
Diolch Dirprwy Lywydd. Fel ddigwyddodd...
Thank you, Dirprwy Lywydd. As was the case in the previous stages of these bill, as I know that other parties are doing, Plaid Cymru members will have a free vote on the issues discussed at this stage of consideration.
Some of the issues around the use of the word around and on. And I'll be frank, I was persuaded by the Cabinet Secretary's response at the time, although in fairness, I'm sort of looking forward now to hear what the Cabinet Secretary's response is to the comments that we've just heard. But I have been persuaded, actually, that the curvature is you know, a factor in some of the issues that are trying to be addressed here, and that was presented to the committee quite clearly in evidence. I don't believe, actually, that running a straight line would be commercially viable in the way that maybe has been outlined, because obviously the only track we have in Wales is of a curved nature, and I don't think that developing an industry around the length of straight running that you need is viable. But clearly I'll listen to what the Cabinet Secretary has to say, but I am minded, I have to say, to vote the same way as I have done in previous stages.
And I call on the Deputy First Minister.
I can't support Rhys Amendments 3 and 5, which propose to change the definition of greyhound racing in the bill. As you rightly say, these amendments were brought forward at stage 2, and I'll again set out clearly why I'm unable to support them at this stage, but I will elaborate further on the points that the member has raised and to illuminate the matters further for other members in the chamber today. So Amendments 3 and 5, as we've heard, seek to change the definition from around a track to on a track. The definition of greyhound racing currently drafted in this bill involves setting greyhounds to run around a track, which is indeed intended to capture the curved nature of greyhound racing tracks. Now, the wording is intentional and very deliberate, as it captures the curved design of the tracks where evidence shows the greatest risk of harm is prevalent. The drafting reflects established industry norms and represents a clear reflection of current practices. Now, greyhound racing on tracks that are not curved in nature is not undertaken in Wales or the UK, and the risk of such activity emerging is considered to be low. So for this reasons, I cannot support Amendments 3 and 5, which seek to broaden the definition beyond what we believe is necessary. Let me continue my remarks just for a moment. What is necessary, what is proportionate, and what is grounded in the Welsh and UK context. Now, during the Stage 2 debate, pardon me, my voice is slightly husky at the moment, committee members were supportive of our rationale behind the definitions, highlighting, indeed, that it had been tested in scrutiny, and the same amendments at stage 2 were not supported. Jane, happy to give way.
Thank you very much for taking that this short intervention. You said that the risk is very low, but it is a risk. And surely the replacement of one word with another means that that actually minimises and reduces the risk and is absolutely not harmful in any way, as I understand to the bill, but could be, if it continues, and there's somebody who wants to come up with this particular way of racing, could be harmful to dogs. Diolch yn fawr.
So I said I was going to elaborate, and I will now elaborate. You've queued me up very, very nicely indeed. But before I elaborate, I'm going to take an intervention across the other side.
I wanted to understand in the drafting why it couldn't have been drafted on or around. Surely that would have just resolved all issues.
Right. Thank you both, because that's quite helpful. I've explained in my opening salvo, if you like, exactly why this reflects current norms of racing both within Wales and within the UK context. It's designed to capture the curvature of a track where the risk of harm or indeed fatalities on the evidence is indeed the greatest. That's why it's been drafted as it is for that very purpose. But let me go a little bit further in response to Jane. If we change the definition of the track to capture things that may happen at some point in the future, hypothetically, it could risk being unwarranted, because what you're doing is prohibiting a theoretical model of racing that does not occur, rather than focusing on the prohibition of real evidence risks that this bill is designed to address. Now, straight line racing, just to be clear, does not occur in Wales or more broadly in the UK. The likelihood of it emerging in Wales is considered very low. Industry representatives were very, very clear in scrutiny that such tracks would not be commercially viable, Jane, that the infrastructure required is substantial and the costs are high, therefore removing any commercial incentive to operate them here within Wales or the UK. So in these circumstances, widening the definition to cover an activity, straight line racing, that does not take place in Wales, is highly unlikely to take place, and for which no clear welfare benefit has been evidenced and demonstrated, would not represent good lawmaking. We are aware, by the way, Rhys, that indeed straight line racing is being trialled in parts, pardon my voice, in parts of Australia, and we will monitor the evidence that is emerging very closely. But given that straight line racing remains new and indeed under evaluation even in Australia, and that no substantial body of evidence has yet demonstrated the comparable harm with curvature tracks or reduced risk, we do not believe that it's good lawmaking. It would be proportionate or necessary for Wales to include straight-line racing with the prohibition at this time. So I understand the spirit in which this is being moved, but we don't think it is appropriate or proportionate within this legislation. For that reason, we would ask members to oppose these amendments.
Rhys Bowen.
Rhys Owen's reply.
I just don't understand your logic, Doug. On would also catch a curved track, and this is not a hypothetical idea. Straight track racing is viable and is happening in Spain, New Zealand and Australia. If the intention of this bill is to ban greyhound racing, we should ban greyhound racing on all tracks, not allow a massive loophole, because the betting industry will want to stop the banning of greyhound racing and will look for loopholes. And there is a clear loophole which will make this legislation clearly unenforceable. And I have no idea why you're carrying on, because one small change, one small word will close that loophole completely. I just don't understand, because straight track racing could happen in Wales. And one word would capture round and straight. Straight track racing would make a mockery of the intention of this bill. You have two choices. You can leave this gaping loophole open, or you can legislate sensibly by seeing that this is happening in other countries and using my amendment to fill this clear gap. Diolch yn fawr.
If Amendment 3 is not agreed, Amendment 5 falls. The question is that Amendment 3 be agreed to. Does any member object? There is objection. We will therefore move to a vote on Amendment 3. Open the vote. Close the vote. In favour 15, 7 abstentions and 30 against. Therefore, the amendment is not agreed. The amendment is not agreed. We'll move now to Group 2, and the second group of amendments relates to reviewing the operation and effect of the Act. The lead amendment is Amendment 6, and I call on Rhys Owen to move and speak to the lead amendment and the other amendments in the group.
I tabled almost identical amendments in stage 2. The only difference is that I've removed the requirement for the evaluation work to begin from 12 months after the bill comes into force. Again, I didn't understand some comments from committee members who are sitting opposite me and the brif weinidog. One Labour member opposite opposed including review and report on the effect and operation of the Act on the bill, as it would be in this legislation, but not in all others. And then the Dipper Weinidog opposed because he is insistent that there would be a review. He said, and I quote, "I would urge the committee not to support Amendment 9 because in line with good practice, there will indeed be a review. And that review will take place no later than 5 years after legislation comes into force." Well, that might be the case if the current Welsh Government had just been elected. However, we must take precautions, bearing in mind there may well be a new Welsh Government after the elections in May. And in terms of the other point that the Labour Committee member had made, earlier this year, I participated in the debate of the post-legislative review of the Public Service Ombudsman Wales Act, which Peredur Owen Griffiths led, and it was highlighted in one of the Finance Committee conclusions, and I quote, "The committee believed that all public bills introduced to the Senedd contain provision for post-legislative review." Because post-legislative review is just as important as scrutiny beforehand. That committee is now being listened to with regards to other legislation. Later on, we'll be looking at the Development of Tourism Visit Accommodation Wales Bill. During stage 2, both the Cabinet Secretary Mark Travis and myself tabled amendments to introducing a requirement on the face of the bill to review the Act. How can such a requirement be acceptable to the tourism bill and not to the prohibition of greyhound racing? As the Cut the Chase coalition said in relation to the review, it guarantees that it will happen, regardless as to who forms the next Welsh Government. It seems now that's the coalition, and I have won the argument, because I'm glad that we've had a U-turn from the Brif Wynid. I'd be interested to see why have you changed your mind, Brif Wynid, because Amendment 11 by the Welsh Government doesn't make a review within 5 years, it makes a review within 3 years. I'd be interested to know why you've changed that also. And it would also see a report based on the review published in a manner considered appropriate. Despite there being some differences, those outcomes are very similar to my amendment in this group that I also tabled in stage 2. Therefore, so to facilitate the delivery of the legislative intention, both charities and myself have campaigned for, I will not be taking amendments 6, 7, 8 and 9 to the vote. Instead, I encourage you to support the government amendment and thank the Brif Wynid for changing his mind, and it's a shame that he didn't change his mind on other matters. Diolch yn fawr.
Griffith.
Diolch yn fawr, Dr Lywyd. Well, I'd reiterate much of that, really. This whole Senedd is always aware of the importance of reflecting on legislation and learning the lessons either from Senedd post-legislative scrutiny or government reviews of legislation. And, as we've heard, regularly committees bring forward recommendations in reports suggesting that needs to happen. It's always good practice to consider whether new laws actually deliver what they say on the tin. And then, of course, to be able to address any shortcomings or unforeseen consequences. Now, I was going to say that the only dilemma, therefore, was whether we go with Rhys's amendments for a 5-year or review after 5 years, or the Cabinet Secretaries after 3, and I think Rhys has answered that question for me. Yeah.
Jane Dodds.
And it's the first time I'll be speaking, so naturally you're going to hear, probably for the last time, about the greyhounds that I've owned, Arthur and Wanda. This is landmark legislation, and I believe we should, and we are really clear that this is going to move forward. These amendments are about doing exactly that, making sure we look back, assess the impact, and learn from what follows. I've had the privilege of looking after both Wanda and Arthur. Both experienced real trauma. Both carried the lasting marks of a system, of a sport designed to profit from their pain. I don't wish to repeat myself, but I will say this every time I come to this chamber to speak about this bill. I am more convinced, not less, of the need for this bill. Situation with regards to greyhound racing is not improving. The death toll at regulated stadiums increased for the 2nd consecutive year in 2024. I am proud that Wales has the opportunity to lead here, to be the first nation in the United Kingdom to draw this line. I know that legislation is already underway in Scotland and that lobbying continues in England and Northern Ireland. Already, we can see that where Wales acts, others will follow. Today, we are not reopening the significant decision that was made last December when we collectively agreed that banning greyhound racing in Wales was the right thing to do. We are making sure at this point that we deliver it properly. And that brings me directly to the amendments before us, tabled by Rhys ap Owen, which require Welsh ministers to review the operation of this Act within 5 years and report back to this Senedd. To those colleagues who have raised concerns about the pace and the depth of scrutiny this bill has received, I say this. This amendment, in part, is a response to that concern. A statutory post-legislative review is a commitment to keep looking, keep asking, and keep acting. It is not a sign of weakness in the legislation, it is a sign of confidence in it, a statement that we are prepared to be judged by the results. Statutory review gives us the legal basis to gather that evidence and, if necessary, to return to this chamber and act on it. The Cut the Chase Coalition, and I pay tribute to them, I think some of them are with us this evening, supports this approach. I support it, and I urge all members to support it too. Diolch yn fawr iawn.
And I call on the Deputy First Minister.
Diolch yn fawr iawn, Diploid Llywydd. So, Amendment 6, 7, 8 and 9 in this group would require a review of the legislation within 5 years of it coming into force, the laying of a report before the Senedd and consultation duties. I understand the intent. I would instead urge members, as indeed has the mover of those amendments, not to back those amendments, but to support Amendment 11 based on 3 years, and I'll explain why now. And thank you for supporting the government amendment here, which does actually work with the spirit and the grain of what you're trying to do, and I have listened. So the government amendment in this group, it's the only amendment I've tabled, so please support it if you're minded to. It's the only amendment I brought forward at stage 3. Places a requirement to carry out that post-legislative review within 3 years, and there's a reason why, within 3 years of the prohibition coming into force, and subsequently publish a report and a review as well, so I ask members to support this. Originally, you're right, Rhys, I rejected the Legislation, Justice, Constitution Committee's recommendation for a statutory review, reaffirming instead, and it is right, the commitment set out in the explanatory memorandum that there would be a review in line with good practice. So I didn't support at stage 2 the non-governmental amendments to add a requirement explicitly for review, etc., 5 years after coming into force. But I'm not afraid of saying I've listened. And I recognise the strength of feeling expressed by members and stakeholders through scrutiny. That's what this process is all about. It's clear that there has been a strong and a consistent desire to embed a requirement to a review into the bill itself. Amendment 11, therefore, working in the spirit of what you had brought forward and others had expressed, and the LJC committee, places a duty on the Welsh ministers to carry out that review of the operation and effect and the compliance with the Act within 3 years of the prohibition coming into force, and to publish that report. Now, we believe this is proportionate and practical. I propose, by the way, a shorter 3-year review period, so that that immediate impact of the prohibition can be assessed while the evidence is still recent and accessible. The measures in the bill are very clear. We anticipate its effects will be felt quickly. So a shorter time frame is more appropriate than the 5 years normally used for larger, more complex regulatory reforms. So we believe and we agree that publishing the review is the most effective and transparent way to demonstrate our engagement with stakeholders and present the findings directly to those affected and the wider public in the most accessible way. We think this is clear, proportionate, workable and a strong basis for gathering meaningful insight. We also think it's a balanced, constructive response to the views expressed by members and stakeholders. So, by putting this requirement, Rhys, for a review on the face of the bill, we aim to give members confidence in this commitment and clear reassurance that it will be carried out in the next government term. So I urge members to support Amendment 11.
Rhys
Bowen to reply.
To U-turns with Labour in Westminster. We've had one today from Labour in Wales. All jokes aside, I'm grateful for the briefing, and I can see the logic behind why you've gone for the 3 years. So I'm happy to support. Diolch yn fawr.
Right. I understand you said you would not move Amendment 6, but you already have. Do you wish to withdraw it? Does any member object to withdrawing Amendment 6? No. Therefore, Amendment 6 is withdrawn. Rhys Bowen, gwelliant 7.
Rhys Bowen, Amendment 7.
Group 3, yw nesaf.
Group 3 is the next group. The third group of amendments relates to transitional arrangements. The lead amendment in this group is Amendment 12, and I call on James Evans to move and speak to the lead amendment and the other amendments in the group.
Diolch, Deputy Presiding Officer. I move Amendment 12 and speak to other amendments in this group relating to transitional arrangements. I want to be clear from the outset that I remain opposed to this bill and the proposed ban on greyhound racing in Wales. In my view, this legislation represents poor policy choice that has emerged not from robust evidence, but from a political agreement between Labour and the Liberal Democrats that will do long-lasting damage to the people who live, work and race in that part of the world. However, if this Senedd is determined to proceed with prohibition, then we have a responsibility to ensure that this legislation is workable and that transition to prohibition is handled properly. This is the purpose of this group of amendments. These amendments focus specifically on how the bill operates during the transition period prior to prohibition. They deal with the practical, regulatory and legal arrangements that must be in place while greyhound racing remains lawful. As the bill is currently drafted, it moves directly from a lawful activity to prohibition, without setting out a clear statutory framework governing the period in between. Legislation of this scale does not operate in theory. It operates in the real world, affecting animals, regulators, local authorities, people who work there and their communities. Without a transitional framework, the bill risks creating a regulatory gap at precisely the point when oversight is needed the most. Amendment 12 therefore requires Welsh ministers to introduce interim regulations governing greyhound racing in Wales within 6 months of royal assent, remaining in place until the date appointed for prohibition. The principle here is straightforward. If greyhound racing is to continue for any period before prohibition takes effect, it must do so within a clear and enforceable regulatory framework. Without that clarity, there is a risk of confusion for enforcement bodies and uncertainty about what standards apply during the transition period. Amendment 13 complements that provision by requiring Welsh ministers to review the effectiveness of those interim arrangements within 2 years and to lay that review before the Senedd. This is a simple accountability measure. If the arrangements are working as intended, the evidence should demonstrate that. If they are not, the Senedd should be aware and able to respond accordingly. Amendments 16 and 17 are consequential provisions, ensuring that these requirements come into force appropriately. And finally, Amendments 20 and 21 address the proposed timetable for prohibition. These amendments extend the earliest and latest possible dates for the ban to take effect. They are not about frustrating the intent of the bill. It reflects the reality that prohibition requires adequate preparation, including enforcement arrangements, rehoming capacity for displaced dogs, and clarity for those people who are affected. Rushing this process risks unintended consequences that could undermine both animal welfare and confidence in this legislation. Taken together, these amendments strengthen the bill by ensuring the transition to prohibition is properly regulated, subject to review, and implemented in a reasonable and orderly way. For those reasons, I urge members to support the amendments in this group. Diolch.
Griffith.
Diolch, Tipper Lywydd. Members will probably know by now my preference has always been that enhanced regulation or proper licensing of greyhound racing should have been the first step here. I know some in the animal welfare sector actually expected or anticipated that that would have been the case. That the phased approach could have tested compliance, it could have improved welfare without going immediately to an outright ban and everything that that entails. And yes, if after time that is shown not to have delivered the outcomes that we all want here, then the option of a ban, of course, is still there. And that would then be a decision taken from a much more informed position, a much stronger evidence base. Now, members will recall, I'm sure, the significant concerns about the gaps in the evidence base for a ban outlined in the Culture Committee's Stage 1 report on the bill. But the main point for me here is that I would expect us to regulate first, then assess, then decide whether we need to go further. That would have been my preferred approach, and that's why I'll be supporting the amendments.
Dodds.
I'll be voting against these, and there are a number of reasons why. I'm not sure, just to respond to Claire's point, I'm not sure that any in the Cut the Chase coalition supported any regulation period. Taken together, they would allow, these amendments would allow greyhound racing to continue in Wales under a new regulatory framework, potentially delaying the ban until October 2031. Simply cannot support that approach. The difference between April 2027 and October 2031 may look small on paper, but in reality it means 4.5 years of more racing. And we know what that means for the dogs involved. With nearly 3/4 of valley-attached dogs suffering adverse effects in a single year, every month means around 10 more animals are exposed to falls, fractures and career-ending injuries. The central premise of Amendment 12 is that a period of interim regulation would provide a responsible bridge to the ban. But let us look at what that regulation actually may deliver. The GB's own published data for 2024, let's remind ourselves of this, shows that 3,809 individual injuries were recorded across the industry. That is the industry's own record of injuries. The most common were injuries to the hind leg, to the hock, to the wrist. 123 dogs were killed at the racetrack that year. A further 51 were euthanized not because of injury, but because they were judged unsuitable for rehoming. These are the figures of a fully licensed, professionally governed industry. This is not the result of regulatory failure, but the result of regulation as designed, recording, categorising, managing harm, yet utterly incapable of preventing it. For after all, the harm is not incidental to greyhound racing, it is inherent to it. The Cultural Committee were unequivocal on this point. No amount of regulation can ever eliminate the inherent risk to greyhound from this sport. And I've seen the truth in my own home as well. As a Senedd, we decided that greyhound racing should be banned. We have reached that conclusion on the basis of substantial evidence. To then ask Welsh taxpayers to fund the regulation of that same industry for a transitional period that would extend to October 2031 strikes me as impossible to justify. Only around 5% of Welsh people follow or participate in greyhound racing directly. The public interest case for that expenditure is, I would suggest, extremely thin, particularly at a time of real pressure in public finances. The argument has been made that more time is needed to prepare for the wind down, yet preparation has always been underway, with the Wales Greyhound Partnership having been in operation for over a year. They are taking responsibility for rehoming the dogs. They have clear plans in place, and I pay credit to them at this point. Between March and September 2025 alone, its 9-member organisations took 75 dogs from the Valley Track into their care. They suspended operations only because the lengthy commencement window made sustained prioritisation of Welsh dogs unworkable, but they are ready to resume the moment a firm date is set. Preparation is not the obstacle here. Will is the obstacle. We cannot allow 5 more years of racing while we wait for a regulatory experiment to run its course. I urge members to reject these amendments. The case for delay has not been made. The case for action is overwhelming. Diolch.
Karen Thomas.
I would like to strongly oppose Amendment 12 as well, which would see greyhound racing in Wales regulated as an interim measure. The Cut the Chase Coalition, which is made up of many animal welfare charities, are clear on this. Any attempt at regulation at this stage is simply a delaying tactic. Our main focus must be the welfare of greyhounds in Wales, and their protection cannot wait any longer than absolutely necessary. Any delay on an outright ban will ultimately mean many more terrible injuries and, tragically, more deaths. In this industry, where dogs and puppies are just classed as wastage, the evidence is very clear. Regulation does not work. Only an outright ban will put a stop to this cruel and unnecessary suffering of greyhounds in Wales. The journey was started by Vanessa from Hope Rescue when she submitted her petition calling for a ban on greyhound racing at the beginning of the Senedd term. The petition received an incredible 35,000 signatures, securing an evidence inquiry by the Petitions Committee and subsequently a debate in this chamber which received support from members of all parties. That was signed by many people that have adopted greyhounds, that have worked with charities, that have seen the terrible injuries that these dogs live with. Vanessa and her team have first-hand experience of the horrendous cruelty that has taken place at the Valleys track in South Wales, with dogs losing their lives and suffering life-altering injuries on that track on a regular basis. Those who signed the petition and responded positively to the Welsh Government consultation did so in favour of this outright ban, not regulation and further delays. The amendment seeks to undermine the true purpose of the bill, and I would urge members to vote against it.
Thank you, Dilynwch Llywydd, and I also agree and I oppose Amendment 12. This is a bill to ban greyhound racing. Greyhound racing is dangerous for the greyhounds, and regulation is not going to change that situation. The central action of greyhounds running very quickly around tracks is one that's replete with risks for the dogs, and while there is a lack of transparency about the data, and that is perhaps problematic, we know exactly what the overall picture is. Injuries to dogs are numerous, and falls happen regularly on the track, and negligence and a lack of aftercare is very evident. The only way to ensure a better future for greyhounds is to ban greyhound racing once and for all, and immediately. Regulation will never address the dangers inherent in racing. That's the important point here. Animal welfare has not improved through regulation. Regulation has not been able to reduce the risks. The serious injuries continue. Greyhounds are very gentle, quiet and loyal dogs, and I know a lot of greyhounds, and they are ones that have been rescued from racing. But it has taken them many years to get over the trauma, if they are ever really able to get over it. Their natural speed has been exploited for the benefit of the betting industry, and they suffer as a result. That is the underlying problem in my mind. These special dogs face abuse in order to produce entertainment, and they're exploited for commercial reasons. There is also another argument against regulation and in favour of bringing in a ban immediately, namely that if a person wants to breed a profitable winner, they need to breed a lot of dogs, and most of those dogs won't be good enough and won't be fast enough. And so what happens to them? At best, they end up in rescue centres that are already struggling, and at worst, they will be wandering our streets. No system of regulation will address that. Take Nell. She came in last in every race that she ran in and was retired at the age of 2. Then she had a year of being passed from one place to another before landing in a rescue centre at the age of 3, reeking of her own filth and fearing the world. Nell now has a great home, but we need to stop this suffering in the first place. We have to stop it now. There is no purpose at all, no argument at all for continuing with a transitional period with some regulation that won't work anyway. Regulation has been tried and it has failed, and failed to keep those dogs safe. So we need to move quickly to a situation where the industry is banned entirely.
For tabling the amendments, because it is important to have the discussion, but I won't be supporting them. I didn't disagree with the Deputy Premier on every point in stage 2. I agreed with him when he said that regulating greyhound racing in Wales detracts from the Welsh Government's intent to bring forward a ban as practical as possible. That was also the intention of this place. As we've heard from Jane Dodds, Delaying the ban only leaves greyhounds at risk of further injury, death, for a longer period of time. The only remaining stadium in Wales is already regulated by industry standards. The industry standards have failed to deliver adequate protection. As such, any attempt to delay the prohibition, which I believe is the intention of James Evans's amendments in this group and the next, that is clear, that's what his intentions are, they therefore should be opposed. Diolch yn fawr.
And I'll call on the Deputy First Minister.
Diolch i'r Prosiect Newydd. Can I just thank, first of all members who have contributed to what has been quite an impassioned debate on the amendments brought forward by James, Amendments 12 and 13. These amendments would seek to make provision for transitional arrangements for the regulation of greyhound racing in Wales and in an interim period before prohibition comes into force, and then to publish a review of that regulation. I cannot support these amendments, and I'll explain why. Regulating greyhound racing in Wales detracts, indeed, as Rhys has just pointed out, from this government's intent to bring forward a ban as soon as practically possible, and it leaves greyhounds at risk of injury and fatality for a longer period. One active greyhound racing stadium remains in Wales, which is GBGB affiliated. It is already regulated by the industry's standards. Setting up infrastructure for further regulation and related enforcement powers for an interim period would be disproportionate, and to be clear, bringing regulation under Welsh Government control may require extensive and expensive changes, particularly if Welsh regulation went further than GBGB standards. Now, in contrast, as has been pointed out, a ban provides a clear, enforceable solution to prevent harm and to safeguard greyhound welfare. In spite of GBGB standards, greyhounds continue to be exposed to harm while racing. Consequently, regulation at this stage would add no value whatsoever and little benefit to prevent the harm associated with racing. The decision to ban greyhound racing was taken as a measure to prevent further harm, and that decision is driven by strong welfare and ethical concerns, reflecting the Welsh Government's commitment to prioritising animal welfare. So as I cannot support these amendments, I also cannot support the related amendments 16 and 17, which would bring these provisions for transitional arrangements for regulation into force on the day after which the bill receives royal assent. Finally, I cannot support amendments 20 and 21 tabled by James. Amendment 20 postpones the earliest date on which the Act can come into force from the 1st of April 2027 to the 1st of October 2028. Amendment 21 postpones the latest date on which the Act can come into force from the 1st of April 2030 to the 1st of October 2031. Now, the member's intention may be to allow time for the transitional arrangements prior to a prohibition suggested by Amendments 12 and 13, but as I have set out very, very clearly, the intention is for a prohibition on greyhound racing in Wales to come into force as soon as is practically possible. The earliest possible date has been identified as 12 months after royal assent. Therefore, the bill provides that it will be no sooner than the 1st of April 2027 and no later than April 2030. This proposed lead-in time will enable third sector organisations to manage the safe rehoming of greyhounds displaced by the ban. It will give the owners of Valley Greyhound Stadium sufficient time to wind down the activity and consider alternative options for that site. And as I set out earlier in response to Amendments 10 and 10A, while I do recognise that some would prefer a shorter time frame to implement the ban, delaying the earliest date and extending the latest date of prohibition can come into force, and as Amendments 20 and 21 propose, would leave greyhounds vulnerable to harm for longer. So therefore, I cannot support Amendments 12, 13, 16, 17, 20 and 21.
President Officer, and thank all members for taking part in the debate. And thank you, Clea, for your support. And I think you and I both shared the same view that this should have been regulated first and then see how regulation was implemented and then look after where we were. I will say to some members, respectfully, my amendment isn't about stopping this bill. It's about regulating the transition period. So I'd just like to ask members to actually read what the amendments are before they make speeches in the chamber. Rhys, the delay is important. It is, because we have to understand that there are animals in this. There are people as well who work in that track. There are livelihoods here, and we need to make sure that any bill that comes in doesn't have any unintended consequences, and that is the purpose of this bill. It doesn't detract, as people have said, from the aims of it, but it's making sure that we have transitional arrangements in place to make sure that anything that carries out there is done in a regulated way to protect those animals that are racing there, which a lot of people, I'm sure, around this chamber want to do. Moving to an outright ban has unintended consequences for the animals and the people who work there. And I think it's poor legislation that's come forward anyway, and we should do as much as we can to strengthen it. And that is why this amendment, these group of amendments put forward, and I will be putting them to the vote. Diolch, Presiding Officer.
Oscar Thodi.
If Amendment 12 is not agreed, Amendment 16 falls. The question is that Amendment 12 be agreed to. Does any member object? I can hear an objection. Therefore, we will proceed to a vote on Amendment 12. Open a vote. Close the vote. In favour 8, 6 abstentions, 38 against. Therefore, Amendment 12 is not agreed. James Evans, Amendment 13. If Amendment 13 is not agreed, Amendment 17 will fall. The question is that Amendment 13 be agreed to. Does any member object? Yes, there is objection. And so we will proceed to a vote on Amendment 13. Open the vote. Close the vote. In favour 7, 5 abstentions, 40 against. Therefore, Amendment 13 is not agreed. Group 4 is next, and the fourth group of amendments relates to impact assessments. The lead amendment in this group is Amendment 14, and I call on James Evans to move and speak to the lead amendment and the other amendments in the group.
Diolch, Presiding Officer. I move Amendment 14 will speak to other amendments in this group relating to impact assessments. These amendments are focused on ensuring that the decision to commence prohibition is taken on a sound, evidential and legal footing. They do not seek to reopen the wider policy debate on whether prohibition should occur. Instead, they ensure that any decision to implement the prohibition is informed by proper evidence, consultation and legal consideration. Amendment 14 requires Welsh ministers to undertake a comprehensive assessment of the economic and social impact that prohibition of greyhound racing in Wales before appointing a commencement date. The assessment must consider the impact on those directly and indirectly employed in the industry, the effects on local economies and communities where racing currently takes place, the potential cost to the public sector and the possible consequences for animal welfare arising from displacement or cessation of regulated racing. The issues were raised during the committee stage of the bill. Members of the committee noted that the evidence base surrounding greyhound racing and its regulation is contested and that the available data presents a complex picture. The committee also heard about evidence about potential impacts on local economies, employment and the welfare implications of displacement should racing cease at the track. Amendment 14 therefore ensures that these matters are assessed comprehensively before a prohibition date is set. It also requires consultation with those who have relevant expertise and experience in including industry participants, local authorities and animal welfare organisations. Importantly, the assessment must be published and laid before the Senedd at least 3 months before the prohibition date is appointed, ensuring that members have the opportunity to scrutinise the evidence before implementation. Amendment 15 complements this by requiring a formal human rights assessment, since we don't have a British Bill of Rights to go through. The Legislation, Justice and Constitution Committee highlighted the need to consider the compatibility with Article 1 of the First Protocol of the European Convention of Human Rights, particularly in relation to the property rights and proportionality. The amendment ensures that those issues are addressed directly and transparently before the Act is commenced. Amendments 18 and 19 are consequential provisions ensuring that these requirements come into force appropriately. Taken together, these amendments ensure the proper implementation of this bill is supported by proper evidence, consultation and legal analysis. This is simply good legislative practice, and for those reasons I urge members to support these amendments in this group. Diolch.
Griffith.
Diolch Mr Llywydd. As I mentioned during the general principles debate, really, legislation has to be evidence-based, proportionate and effective, and the committee, the Culture Committee in its Stage 1 report obviously highlighted that the evidence base for this bill was highly contested and insufficiently robust. Now, despite these concerns being raised, the government hasn't really completed sufficient work on assessing the impacts of the bill, particularly, I'd say, in reflecting what the Amendment 14 says in relation to the impact, the social and the economic impact. Now, regardless of where you stand on the principle of a ban, we should all strive, shouldn't we, to make sure that the very highest standards in terms of legislative process and rigour are upheld. So I will be supporting Amendments 14 and 16 to correct the oversight around the assessment of the economic and social impact of the bill. But on the other two amendments, and I think the response from members here said it all, really. I think it's refreshing that a reform member of the Senedd is cheerleading the UN Convention on Human Rights. Long may that continue. I'm not convinced, to say the least, that those amendments are required. I voted against those particular amendments at Stage 2, and I intend fully to do so again tonight.
Jane Dodds.
Diolch yn fawr iawn. So, I do want to engage seriously with the amendments in this group because questions have been raised which deserve a serious answer. Economic impacts matter, human rights issues matter, but I do have two specific concerns. My first concern is about duplication. The Welsh Government has already established an implementation group to oversee the transition to post-racing Wales. This includes the local authority, it includes GB, and it includes other representatives. So I have to ask, what is the purpose of the implementation group if we do not trust it to do its job? My other concern relates to the human rights assessment proposed in Amendment 15. This amendment asks Welsh ministers to assess the compatibility of the bill with Article 1 of the first protocol to the European Convention on Human Rights. Now, I have to admit, this gave me a short pause and a significant element of confusion. The member who put forward this amendment is a member of Reform UK, a party whose leader has stated that leaving the ECHR would be his first priority in government and whose manifesto commits to repealing the Human Rights Act altogether. And yet here we are with an amendment calling for a detailed assessment of our ECHR obligations before we can proceed with banning greyhound racing. It is, I must say, a very curious position. I want to be clear that the legal questions around the ECHR are not ones that I dismiss lightly. They are serious and they have been seriously examined. The Senedd's Legislation, Justice and Constitution Committee examined these issues back in December, and the Welsh Government's own legal advisers have said that this covers the ground sufficiently. That brings me to the heart of this debate. The human rights framework asks us to consider proportionality, to weigh competing rights and interests carefully against one another. That is an important principle. But proportionality is not a one-sided exercise. On one side, we have the property rights and economic interests of those involved in the greyhound racing industry, and they are considerable. On the other, the welfare of well-loved animals who experience fear, pain, and lasting distress. If any of you have a dog in this chamber, I want you to consider that your dog is no different to my dog. Your dog is no different. Would you like to intervene? Great.
We all care about animal welfare. You know, my dog's a working dog, and she also goes working as part of her breed. It's what she's about. And I think sometimes, Jane, with all due respect, I think you give the people who race in this industry a bad name when some of those people love their dogs just as much as anybody else in here. So I'd reflect on some of your comments about some of the people who are in this industry because they care about their dogs an awful amount more so than you ever give them credit for.
Thank you. I'm not sure how to respond to that, except to say that this is about animals that we love and that I know you care for as well. And I have seen their suffering and I have seen the consequences of that. They are bred specifically for profit and they are discarded when they are no longer of use. And that's what happened with my 2 dogs. And that's what's happening right now, today, in Wales, and we intend to ban it. I don't believe we need to keep weighing that balance. This Senedd has already had evidence before it. So, I respectfully ask members to keep the welfare of these animals at the forefront of our decision and to reject the amendments in this group. Diolch yn fawr.
I call on the Deputy First Minister.
I will try and address these amendments in a serious and a reasoned and a reasonable way, but I'll also be explaining, James, why I cannot support these amendments. First of all, in respect of Amendment 14, this would require Welsh ministers to assess the economic and social impact of the bill and to report on the assessment. Now, just to explain, the explanatory memorandum, the regulatory impact assessment and the integrated impact assessments have been published and laid alongside the bill. I am satisfied that the social and the economic impacts have been assessed through these documents. I responded to the related recommendation by the Culture, Welsh Language, Sport and International Relations Committee and advised that the explanatory memorandum, the regulatory impact assessment and the integrated impact assessment would be updated ahead of stage 3 to reflect any additional information received since the bill's introduction. And we talked at length about the means that the ends we were going to try and get additional information. So these assessments have been amended as further information has been made available to the Welsh Government through the implementation group and dialogue with the industry, and subsequently they've been laid in front of the Senedd following stage 2, so we've delivered on what we said we would do. A detailed socio-economic duty assessment has also been completed and a summary is included in the explanatory memorandum. And just to make clear, the Welsh Government will continue to engage with stakeholders via the implementation group, who are providing practical guidance and advice to mitigate the impacts and to support transition. Now, I cannot support Amendment 15 tabled by James, which requires Welsh ministers to undertake a human rights assessment of the impacts that the Act will have on those affected. But let me explain why. Bill provisions are always subject to a thorough assessment of legislative competence, including, by the way, convention rights, before they are introduced. The outcome of the Welsh Government's assessment of the bill's compatibility with convention rights at introduction is included in the explanatory memorandum which accompanies the bill. During determination, indeed, the Llywodraeth also determined that the provisions of the bill are within the legislative competence of this Senedd. And I am satisfied that the bill is compatible with the European Convention of Human Rights, including Article 1 of Protocol 1 and Article 8. I committed in correspondence to the Legislation, Justice and Constitution Committee to updating the Equality, Diversity, Inclusion and Human Rights Assessment, which is now reflected in the explanatory memorandum and the regulatory impact assessment. So I therefore also cannot support related amendments 18 and 19, which provide that new sections be added to the bill related to amendments 14 and 15 coming into force the day after the legislation receives royal assent. Diolch de Brotel.
I'll go on James Evans.
And I call on James Evans to reply to the debate.
Officer, and thank you, Clear, for supporting some of my amendments. No, you can't support them all, but the support is welcomed. I would say, answered on the point of Article 1 of human rights, so I would love us to get out of the ECHR. There's no one who wants to leave the ECHR more than me. But unfortunately, when you've got law in front of you, you have to use the legal routes that are available to you at the time. And these are the legal routes that are available to us at the time for protecting Welsh workers here who work on that track. I would like a British Bill of Rights that protects British workers,
Will you take an
protects
intervention,
British
James?
people, not shackles to the rights of Europe. But we are where we are. Yes, I will take an intervention.
Would you be willing to note that it was actually the Liberal Democrats that first called for an EU referendum back in 2009 when Nick Clegg was the leader, which ultimately was the precursor to the line about wanting to leave the ECHR?
As someone who has spent most of my life campaigning against the Liberal Democrats, nothing that they say or do surprises me at all, I'll be honest with you. But I will say this is probably the last time I am going to speak on this bill before stage 4. And I do think it is important that we do have those proper impact assessments laid before the Senedd to show the impact it is going to have on the communities affected, on the people who are affected, about the economy. Members in the back in the Labour Party may laugh, but there are jobs, there are people there who work on that track, and I think you should be ashamed laughing at the people who are going to lose their jobs. This bill is not proportionate. It is poor legislation, poorly thought out, cooked up in a backroom deal between the Cabinet Secretary for Finance and the member for Mid and West Wales. This isn't the proper way to regulate. It's been driven by a certain group of people who are hell-bent on banning everything across Wales. And I will say that change cannot come soon enough, because I'm afraid to say this place is becoming a laughingstock of banning everything that people enjoy across this country.
If Amendment 14 is not agreed, Amendment 18 falls. The question is that Amendment 14 be agreed to. Does any member object? Yes, there is objection. Therefore, we will proceed to a vote on Amendment 14. Open the vote. Close the vote. In favour 5, 6 abstentions, 40 against. Therefore, Amendment 14 is not agreed. James, Amendment 15. If Amendment 15 is not agreed, Amendment 19 falls. The question is that Amendment 15 be agreed to. Does any member object? Yes, there is objection, so we will proceed to a vote. Open the vote. Close the vote. In favour 3, 6 abstentions, 42 against. Therefore, Amendment 15 is not agreed. Deputy First Minister, Amendment 11. The question is that Amendment 11 be agreed to. Does any member object? Yes, there is objection. And so we will proceed to a vote on Amendment 11. Open the vote. Close the vote. In favour 42, 7 abstentions, 2 against. Therefore, Amendment 11 is agreed. Rees, Amendment 8.
No, there wasn't a vote on the previous one, therefore it's not fallen. I still have to ask the question. Now.
Amendment 9.
Group Pimp.
Group 5. The final group of amendments relates to coming into force arrangements. And the lead amendment in this group is Amendment 10, and I call on Rhys ap Owen to move and speak to the lead amendment and the other amendments in the group.
Diolch, Deputy. I explained in stage 2 why I believe that greyhound racing should be prohibited as of the 1st of April 2027. A committee member at stage 2 suggested that a 4-year period was needed to provide the Welsh Government with flexibility. I haven't understood many things during this debate, and I didn't understand the Deputy First Minister comments when he advised that the current lead in time, as drafted, would reduce harm to greyhounds as it gives time to stakeholders. Well, I will not be convinced that allowing greyhound racing to continue until 2030 will reduce harm to greyhounds if racing is banned in 2027. I just cannot see that logic. The time frame I am proposing is what Blue Cross, Dogs Trust, Achub Middle Cymru, Hope Rescue and the RSPCA have called for. They are the ones who are preparing to rehome the dogs affected, as we've heard already from Jane Dawes. So any argument that there isn't capacity is fundamentally flawed. So to support the rehoming, rehabilitation and treatment of any dogs impacted by the end of greyhound racing in Wales, the Greyhound Partnership was established shortly after the ban was announced in February 2025. There's been a long period of preparation already. This group comprises of 9 animal welfare organisations and is currently preparing to rehome up to 258 dogs every 2 months following the implementation of a ban if required. The charities are ready, and we know that other tracks have been wound down in as little as 9 months, for example the track in Swindon. So there is no reason why the Welsh Government should delay. I stand by my deadline of the 1st of April 2027, but if a majority are uncomfortable with the time frame, I urge them to back the compromise position tabled by my colleague Jane Dawes. But I'd also be interested to hear what the Dirprwy Brifynida has to say about this matter, and I'm sure we'll hear more from the leader of the Welsh Liberal Democrats about her own amendments. Diolch yn fawr.
Jane Dawes.
Diolch yn fawr iawn. I'm just proposing Amendment 10A. Before I do, I want to be unambiguous. My preference is for Amendment 10, tabled by Rhys ap Owen, to carry. A commencement date of no later than the 1st of April 2027 is the right outcome, and I urge every member who can support it to do so. Equally, I look forward to hearing from the Cabinet member as well. This amendment exists because I understand that colleagues may have genuine reservations about process, about timing, and about the practicality of implementations. To finish, this is the last time I will speak at this debate, and I'm grateful to the Cabinet member for his time and for his support and for his ability to discuss many of the issues. And I'm grateful as well for the support I've received from many, many colleagues across this Cabinet, across the Chamber and the Cabinet as well. It hasn't been easy. I will concede that as a sole member of a party wanting to see this happen, I'm really grateful for that support and for the kind words of just genuine keep going that I've heard. So I am grateful to you all. We know that right now in the rescue centre in Rhysaman, which is where Wanda came from, there is a dog waiting to take her place, and another one after that, and another. There are many dogs that are waiting to be rescued, and if there's one thing, if you leave this place and you're looking for a rescue dog, I suggest you consider a greyhound. They sleep 20 out of 24 hours, and contrary to myth, they only require 2 20-minute walks a day. They do love to run. They don't like to race, and that's the difference. So I would say to you, the last time I speak, please do consider this amendment. I look forward to hearing from the Cabinet member, but I'm also grateful for the support to get this bill to this particular stage. Diolch yn fawr iawn.
Griffith. Diolch Deputy Llywydd. Of course, there's nothing, and not going to do the Cabinet Secretary's job for him, but there's nothing in the bill that says that the ban doesn't necessarily come into force on the 1st of April 2027. That's the purpose of having a window, is that there is an opportunity to take everything into account. Now, you know, you're right, I'm very aware that the animal welfare groups say that they can sort of create that provision in time, but there are many moving parts here. You know, the advisory group that the Minister set up is working on other aspects or consequences of the ban. We've just heard about the economic, you know, implications potentially of people losing their jobs and needing to be found the support that they need, etc. So, you know, I don't think we should put a hard date that's too early. I think, you know, from April 2027 to April 2030, which is what is in the bill at the minute, gives the government a window to make sure that it's introduced in a responsible and reasonable way, and not because they have to do it by next week. I think that that's probably the best approach. I was going to make further comment about you know, why we're all here and what we all want to achieve, but I'll save those for stage 4.
The Deputy First Minister.
Can I, first of all, as I'm speaking to the last group of amendments, just thank all of those who've contributed to scrutiny in today and in previous stages of the scrutiny of this legislation, including those who've moved amendments and inspired debate, but also can I just give thanks as well to my small but perfectly formed group of officials who've worked so diligently and so assiduously on this, including with members across the Senedd as well. So, Amendment 10, as we've heard, removes the earliest date currently provided for of the 1st of April 2027 and instead brings forward the latest possible commencement date to be in no later than the 1st of April 2027. Amendment 10A, in Jane's name, looks to change the latest possible commencement date to the 1st of April 2028. I understand your thinking with both of you on this, but I'm going to explain a little bit more about my rationale here as well. I do understand the sense of urgency expressed by many members today to end greyhound racing in Wales as early as possible to prevent further harm to greyhounds. However, the current lead-in time, as drafted in the bill, is the right way to deliver this safely and definitively. It allows all stakeholders to adjust, mitigating the impacts of the prohibition on the rehoming and the welfare sector, the greyhounds, the racing industry, but also the wider community in that area. The implementation group, as has been mentioned, will play a central role in supporting the transition to a ban, helping to mitigate the potential impacts and provide really practical advice and guidance and insight. They will ensure that this transition is safe and it's responsible and it's carefully considered. We expect them to advise Welsh ministers on a proposed timetable for commencement and to assure all parties that the necessary transition measures are fully in place before that date. Now, the group's considerations, as we've discussed in previous stages of this scrutiny, will be wide-ranging. They will need to ensure that greyhounds can be safely rehomed, advise on the future of the site itself, so we don't leave a site unused and unloved, support the workforce to transition through appropriate measures and assess the readiness of enforcement officers and local authorities. There is an enforcement element to this legislation as well. They must also consider the wider community impacts and work with the industry to ensure that practical steps are in place so that the prohibition is honoured and enforceable from day one. Now, these are complex and interdependent issues that must be properly considered, and that's where the work of the implementation group really comes in. It's been set up for a very good reason. Now, we do expect the group to act with pace, but also with careful consideration of these matters as well. They are formally tasked with supporting the transition, providing reports to Welsh ministers to guide Welsh ministers' decisions on the coming into force date. This commencement date will be set once all the transitional arrangements are considered and will benefit from clear assurance that the necessary measures are in place. Now, I fully expect, by the way, that the group will want to recommend a date sooner rather than later. Indeed, as early as they are confident that that transition can be delivered safely and responsibly without compromising greyhound welfare or indeed community stability as well. There's a good reason not to rush at this. If we move too quickly, it risks creating potentially new welfare issues or placing avoidable strain on rehoming and enforcement capacity. and causing disruption in the local community. What we want is a safe transition with sequencing, with judgment, and setting not just the earliest possible date, but the right date. So in its report, the Culture, Communications, Welsh Language, Sport and International Relations Committee considered that the proposed lead-in period was sensible, and that was reinforced indeed at the debate in stage 2. So I therefore reiterate my commitment that the bill will be brought into force at the earliest practical opportunity within the time frame we've laid out. But let me expand just a little more. I remain fully committed to bringing the ban into force at the earliest practicable point within that window. So keeping our commencement window from April 2027 to April 2030 ensures that we deal with all those aspects of the process, and we can hear from the implementation group as well. It allows them to carry out their work effectively and provide that advice. The point of the window, Jane and Rhys, is not to delay. It's to ensure readiness. It allows us to bring the ban in as early as possible without jeopardising welfare, community stability or operational capacity. So the strength of this transition, the strength of the bill as currently drafted, lies in the expertise around the implementation group table, from welfare specialists to enforcement bodies to local partners and indeed the industry themselves. Their collective advice must shape the final commencement date. And this group is uniquely placed to identify the risks early, ensure that the safeguards are in place. Their involvement is what will give this minister the confidence that we have a successful transition. And just to say, ensuring that we have a positive and a productive future for the site itself is in everyone's interests. We have a responsibility to manage the consequences of ban, responsibility for that site, for that community and the surrounding economy as well. And employees of the industry, as have been mentioned before, deserve clarity and support, not sudden disruption. So giving advice and access and training and support to move into new opportunities, all of that. So a considered commencement strengthens, I would say, Jane, the credibility of the legislation, Rhys, and ensures it delivers the outcome that this Senedd intends. So on that basis, I would urge members to, with respect, resist the amendments, or even for the members, if they're convinced by the rationale behind what we are putting forward and what was debated and scrutinised in stage 2, to withdraw their amendments, having sought this clarification from me, and support the way forward laid out within the bill as set out now. Diolch yn fawr.
Rhys Bowen to reply.
Diolch yn fawr, Dirprwy Lywydd. I agree with Batsy Dogs and Catso, who said, with only one track and an implementation group already working, it is unclear why a maximum of 3 years will be needed for the bill to come into force. And I hope it will not be a maximum of 3 years. But I have listened to the Dirprwy Weinidog, and I do concede the point with regards to the expertise of the implementation group. Therefore, I will be withdrawing my amendment tonight. We've heard some comments again this evening about backroom deals. It's a lazy argument to throw if we don't like policy or legislation. We all know that the best decisions are made when people work together across different parties. I thank Jane for pushing this legislation, but let's be honest, if it wouldn't have reached this stage unless it had broad support with the majority in this place. I hope as politics becomes more fractured, that the nature of that working together that we've seen in this Senedd continues to the next. Tonight, we have taken a greyhound stride forwards in animal welfare. Diolch yn fawr.
Before disposing of Amendment 10, we will first dispose of the amendment to that amendment. Jane Dodds, Amendment 10A. Not moved. Not moved.
Rhys, withdraw. Does any member object to it being withdrawn? No. Okie. Right. James, question.
James, Amendment 20. It is moved. The question is that Amendment 20 be agreed to. Does any member object? There is objection. We'll therefore move to a vote on Amendment 20. Open the vote. Close the vote. In favour 4, 8 abstentions and 40 against. Therefore, Amendment 20 is not agreed. James, Amendment 21. It's moved. The question is that Amendment 21 be agreed to. Does any member object? There is objection. We will therefore move to a vote on Amendment 21. Open the vote. Close the vote. In favour 3, 8 abstentions and 41 against. Therefore, Amendment 21 is not agreed. We have reached the end of our Stage 3 consideration of the Prohibition of Greyhound Racing Wales Bill. I declare that all sections and schedules of the bill are deemed agreed, and that concludes Stage 3 proceedings. Of Tourism and Regulation of Visitor Accommodation Wales Bill, and the bell will be rung 5 minutes before we reconvene. And I would encourage members to return to the chamber promptly, please. Okay, we will now move on to the Stage 3 proceedings on the development of tourism and regulation of visitor accommodation Wales Bill. The first group of amendments relate to advertising and marketing. The lead amendment is Amendment 1, and I call on the Cabinet Secretary to move and speak to the lead amendment. Thank you very much, Llywydd. And before moving on to the substance of the amendments, I would like to make a few general points. Stage 3 amendments from the government focus on the key areas that were discussed during the bill's journey through the Senedd, as well as technical amendments in order to improve clarity. We have tabled amendments that build on the significant amendments that were discussed at Stage 2. The amendments before us today explain responsibilities for those who advertise visitor accommodation, including online platforms, the circumstances where which temporary licences will be available, and ensures that powers within the bill do allow the transfer of licences. We've also introduced a revised explanatory memorandum following Stages 1 and 2. The changes include additional information in relation to the prevention of nuisance, which were added to the bill at Stage 2, and we will publish a further explanatory memorandum to reflect the final bill. And naturally, those reading the bill should consult the most up-to-date version. I would like to thank those who have contributed to the development of this bill, including bodies within the sector, members of the Senedd, and officials who have worked in order to bring this legislation forward. And it was, of course, part of the cooperation agreement.
I turn now to the first group of amendments. This is a group which deals with advertising and marketing of visitor accommodation. The government is firmly of the view that it is reasonable to expect advertising platforms to take some responsibility for accommodation they are marketing. The bill requires such platforms to take reasonable steps to include a valid registration number in their advertising. Failure to do so commits an offence. The bill provides for a defence of reasonable excuse to be made in relevant circumstances. Amendment 71 makes it explicit that if someone has taken all reasonable steps to comply with the requirements, or is not aware that they are breaching those requirements, then they will not commit an offence. What is reasonable would depend upon the facts, but might include steps such as informing accommodation providers a registration number is required, giving them space to include it in an advert, making it a contractual requirement for it to be included and updated as necessary, and where appropriate, checking the format of the number to confirm that it is indeed a registration number. And of course, if an advertising platform were later informed an advert did not include a valid registration number, they would be expected to take it down. But this Amendment 71 makes clear that where it would not be reasonable for a person or platform constantly to monitor their listings or to perform ongoing checks, they will not have committed an offence. Amendments 49, 70 and 71 put all the advertising, marketing and offering requirements under the bill in sections 46 and 47. Should this be agreed, it would mean the requirements and associated offence for offering unlicensed regulated visitor accommodation would sit alongside the wider, more general requirements and offences for advertising and marketing visitor accommodation without a valid registration number. This not only provides greater clarity, but more importantly, allows the expanded defence offered under Amendment 71 to apply in both cases. Amendment 71 additionally provides that a person can only be punished once for an offence under this section. The remainder of the amendments in this group deal with the consequences of those changes. Amendment 50 updates section 32 to reflect the removal of the offence in relation to offering to provide unlicensed regulated visitor accommodation. Amendment 67, 68 and 69 make minor technical updates to section 46, and Amendment 1 updates the overview section of the bill to reflect the changes Amendments 70 and 71 would make to Part 4. So the issues addressed by this group of amendments is one that Sam Kurtz particularly has raised through the passage of the bill. I'm grateful to him and industry bodies for their ongoing engagement on this issue, which has helped us to provide the clarity provided in these amendments, and I hope members will feel able to support them.
Thanking all those who have worked to bring this bill forward. I'm grateful for the constructive and consensual nature of the discussions that have taken place during this passage, and I'm pleased that we've been able to find common ground on many aspects of this legislation. The number of government amendments brought forward at both stage 2 and 3 demonstrates the value of the scrutiny process, particularly given the significant volume of legislation that has passed through this Senedd since the start of 2026. Turning to the amendments in Group 1, and specifically Amendments 70 and 71, these relate to the issue of liability in relation to the registration number issued by the Welsh Revenue Authority. As has been alluded to, and at stage 2, I did table amendments on this issue as I had concerns about where liability would sit, particularly in relation to whether platforms or agencies might be expected to take on responsibility for ensuring that the registration number advised was accurate. My view has always been that the responsibility for ensuring the registration number is accurate and valid should sit with the visitor accommodation provider. It is the provider, rather than the agency or platform, that has issued the registration number by the WRA. I am, however, grateful to the Cabinet Secretary for taking time to discuss these concerns with me and for the movement from the Government has made to from this point at stage 2 to today. That engagement has helped to provide greater clarity around the intention of these provisions. And on that basis, and in recognition of the progress that has been made following the amendments I tabled previously, I will be supporting the Government amendments in this group. Diolch.
Luke Fletcher.
Diolch. Llywydd, and I too would like to thank all those who have worked on this bill. It's been a long journey, and the Cabinet Secretary rightly highlighted that it began its journey during the cooperation agreement. So I would give a specific thanks to all, the work that Sian Gwenllian, Adam Price and Kevin Campbell did throughout this process. Of course, this bill is the second part to the visitor levy bill, to all intent and purpose, and arguably the most consequential of the two. Now, throughout this entire debate, throughout the debate with the visitor levy, we all became very well rehearsed around the lack of data in multiple parts of the wider economy, but this is a particular issue when it comes to the tourism sector for a number of reasons. Now, as we've outlined consistently and as we've heard throughout the debate on this bill and the visitor levy, tourism is a vital part of the economy. There is no disagreement on this. Making sure that it works with the communities it operates in will only strengthen it further as a sector by improving the tourism experience for those communities. In relation to what we have before us today, being able to firstly understand how many visitor accommodations are operating in Wales, and secondly, understand whether or not those accommodation providers are adhering to the safety standards we all expect them to do, does two things. It gives visitors confidence when coming to Wales, and it allows us to root out those bad faith actors within the sector, but it also gives us the base knowledge of how our communities are operating, how many buildings are accommodations within those communities, and thereby allow us then to make informed decisions on policy. I've appreciated those conversations facilitated by the Cabinet Secretary up until this point, and was glad to see our amendments at stage 2 pass. Looking forward, of course, to the debate at stage 3. And in relation to this group, we'll be supporting the government amendments. I do think it's reasonable for advertising agents to take responsibility in the way that the Cabinet Secretary sets out. And I'd also say, to be fair to the Cabinet Secretary, he has set out consistently that this isn't about catching people out. And that's been reflected by the provisions set out by the Cabinet Secretary, allowing for those people who have potentially committed an offence to correct that. And I think that shows that commitment for this being something that isn't designed to catch people out. So we will be supporting the amendments tabled by the government in this group.
Cabinet.
The Cabinet Secretary reply if he wishes to do so.
Thank colleagues for their indication of support for these amendments.
A question.
The question is that Amendment 1 be agreed to. Does any member object? No. Amendment 1 is therefore agreed. We'll move immediately to Group 2. And the second group of amendments relates to development of tourism. The lead amendment is Amendment 108, and I call on Rhys Owen to move that amendment.
Thank you, Llywydd. I'd like to emphasise how grateful I am to everyone who has collaborated with me on this bill, including the legal team, the committee clerks, and the Professional Association of Self-Caterers UK Wales, PASC. Their efforts have been beneficial because we've had success with some amendments at stage 2, and I'm very hopeful again for this this amendment again today. I'd like to thank the Cabinet Secretary and your team for your dedication at stage 2 to positive collaboration, and that has happened. My amendments in this group require ministers to publish the code. At present, there is a choice as to publish or not. Now, perhaps some of you will question whether the code is important at all. Well, yes, it is, and this is why. The code will include, for example, guidance on customer service, accessibility, sustainability, environmental issues, and promoting the Welsh language. As the Cabinet Secretary has already said, the Code of Practice will ensure that people know what is expected of them and that they can find ways to comply as conveniently as possible, which goes to Luke Fletcher's point earlier that there is a desire to collaborate with the sector. It's evident to me that there is a consensus that having such a document is vital, and so I hope that you can support my efforts to ensure that this code is published. In addition to that, I've been pleased to collaborate with the Cabinet Secretary to introduce a second amendment, namely Amendment 109, which will enable the guidance to be withdrawn if, after consultation with organisations representing businesses that work in the area of tourism or that are involved in tourism-related activities in Wales, there is a view that the code is no longer of practical use. As I hope is clear by now, promoting a positive relationship with and being helpful to the tourism sector, that is what is at the heart of this group of amendments. Thank you very much.
Diolch, Llywydd. And moving on to the second group of amendments, I'd like to speak to those in my name, say 105 and 106. These amendments would require Welsh ministers to prepare and publish a report on the promotion of tourism development in Wales, with particular consideration given to the current 182-day threshold for non-domestic rates and what alternative minimum letting periods might be appropriate. The 182-day rule has caused considerable concern across the sector. It is therefore essential that we get this right, both for the industry and for the wider Welsh economy. Operators need certainty about the rules they are working under, and we must ensure that any threshold strikes the right balance between regulation and supporting a sustainable visitor economy. We must also ensure that there is sufficient supply of visitor accommodation available when demand peaks, particularly in areas that rely heavily on tourism. I've previously made clear my view that the current 182-day threshold is too high, and that a threshold closer to 105 nights would represent a more proportionate and realistic requirement for many providers. That is why I believe it is important that the government undertakes further work to properly assess whether the current approach is the right one. And for that reason, I seek the support of the Senedd for my amendments. Diolch, Llywydd.
Cabinet Secretary to reply. Thank you, Llywydd. May I start by thanking Rhys Owen for the constructive conversations that we had following stage 2 on the issue of the publication of the code. Following those discussions and having heard what Rhys Owen has said this afternoon, we are happy to support amendments 108 and 109.
To support amendments 105 and 106. The duty that it creates is for the Welsh Government to produce a report on tourism development. It's normal, of course, for governments to review the effectiveness of policies. It's simply not necessary to legislate for reports to ensure that that happens, and a future Senedd government should be allowed to exercise its responsibilities in this area in the normal way. That government could then, if it wished, bring forward proposals in relation to the 182-day requirement, having had full consideration of the matter. I remain convinced that requiring businesses to be available half of the year is not unreasonable if they wish to take advantage of the support that is there for businesses that declare themselves to be such, and that it creates a proper balance between the needs of the industry and the need for accommodation for people who live in those parts of Wales where tourism is an important part of the economy. It's also the case, Llywydd, that the Senedd, the next Senedd, will be able to scrutinise ministers on their plans and their actions to support the visitor accommodation, and for the Senedd itself to decide what it wants to hear, who it wants to hear from, and when it wants to hear it. For those reasons, I ask members to support amendments 108 and 109, but to reject amendments 105 and 106.
Rhys Owen to reply.
Thank you, Llywydd, and I thank the Cabinet Secretary for his support, as well as supporting my amendments. I encourage you to vote for Sam's too. And during stage 2, Sam will remember that I had proposed similar amendments to the one Sam has brought before the Chamber today, but I'm willing to admit that your amendment, Sam, is better than mine, because it includes that only one report is necessary. And I think that does address the concern expressed by the Cabinet Secretary in response to me in stage 2, namely that creating a legal target of publishing reports frequently takes officials' time away from other important work. So I do support the amendment. Thank you.
The question is that Amendment 108 is agreed to. Does any member object? No, it's therefore agreed. Rhys Owen, 109, is it moved? It is. Are there any objections to 109? No, it's therefore agreed. Samuel Kurtz, 105, it's moved. Are there any objections to Amendment 105? There are objections. We will therefore move to a vote on Amendment 105. Open the vote. Close the vote. In favour 14, no abstentions, 38 against. Therefore, Amendment 105 is not agreed. Group 3 is next, and the third group of amendments relates to technical and miscellaneous amendments. The lead amendment in the group is Amendment 2, and I call on the Cabinet Secretary to move that amendment.
Brings together technical amendments throughout the bill. I'll try to be as brief as I can while still providing a proper explanation of the purpose and effect of these amendments. Amendments 2 to 4 provide minor clarifications to the definition of regulated visitor accommodation, and Amendment 20 is consequential to Amendment 3. Amendments 6 and 9 ensure the definition of fitness for visitor accommodation applies where a person is offering to provide the accommodation. Amendment 13 removes an unnecessary cross-reference, and Amendments 15 and 25 update the licence condition and approval requirements in relation to registration. Amendment 18 provides that regulations about training do not need to make provision about a code of practice if there is no active code, either because it has not yet been produced or because it has been withdrawn. Amendments 19, 23, 56, 60, 62 to 64 and 84 all update cross-references to the Welsh Minister's regulatory functions, which are contained in parts 3, 4 and 5 of the bill. This was a point raised by the ethol Committee in stage 1 in respect of the information notice powers, and we have reviewed all the similar references in the bill as a result to make these clarifications. Amendment 61 updates the Welsh language version of the bill to ensure it is equivalent to the English version. Amendment 85 is a technical clarification to the requirement to consult on the review of the operation of the bill. Finally, shall we then more significantly, Amendment 65 narrows the scope of the data sharing gateway to be inserted in the Tax Collection Management Wales Act of 2016 to be clear that the scope only allows the sharing of information which relates to registration, not any other information held by the Welsh Revenue Authority. All of these amendments aim to support the clarity and effective operation of the bill, and I would therefore ask members to support them.
Jenny Rathbone.
I'm sure members will be glad to know that I won't be discussing the miscellaneous amendments, but I think this is the moment to just thank the Cabinet Secretary for including an addition to the explanatory memorandum around items such as the waste collection. This is one of the most irritating things for constituents where rubbish is presented on the wrong day and then it's spread around the streets and people have to put up with it day after day. I agree that it is not the right place to put it on the face of the bill, but what the explanatory memorandum does at 3.57 and 3.58 is make it absolutely clear that if you're providing visitor accommodation, it's a business, and therefore you need to be using business waste provision. It also emphasises that the Welsh Government intends to work with local authorities to support enforcement action, which is already being undertaken by environmental health or housing enforcement, as similar to Rent Smart Wales. And I think that's a really useful clarification so that people realise that there are regulations and they need to be adhered to.
The Cabinet Secretary to reply.
There were very useful discussions at stage 1 in front of the ethol committee about the responsibility of accommodation providers to ensure that those visitors who occupy their premises are aware of practical things like where waste is to be stored, the days to be collected and so on. Those discussions were followed up at stage 2 when I was glad to be able to accept amendments from Luke Fletcher about the way in which nuisance caused by visitors can be responded to as part of this bill. I was glad of the opportunity to include a reflection of those discussions in the updated explanatory memorandum. Llywydd, and as I said in my opening remarks, there will be a further updated memorandum to reflect the nature of decisions made by the Senedd this afternoon.
A question.
The question is that Amendment 2 be agreed to. Does any member object? No, Amendment 2 is agreed. Amendment 3, is it moved by the Cabinet Secretary? It is. Are there any objections to Amendment 3? There are none. It's therefore agreed. Amendment 4. It's moved. Are there any objections? No. It's therefore agreed. We'll move now to Group 4, and the fourth group of amendments relates to regulated visitor accommodation. Amendment 5 is the lead amendment, and I call on the Cabinet Secretary to move the amendment.
The issue of spare rooms has been debated since this bill was introduced to the Senedd. The decision not to include spare rooms in the first tranche of accommodation to be brought within a licensing regime was one of practicality rather than principle. A great deal more work would be needed, I continue to believe, before the licensing regime could be extended to include such accommodation and operate in a proportionate and meaningful way. The amendments in this group, however, smooth the path to the inclusion of spare rooms should a future Senedd choose to take that step. Amendment 5 creates a power, subject to Senedd approval through Amendment 86, so that if a future government brings spare rooms into the licensing scheme, provision can be made at the same time about what references to premises should be taken to mean in those cases. As presently constructed, any spare room regime could only apply to the room itself, saying nothing about any other facilities, bathrooms, kitchens, communal areas, for example, on which a visitor occupying that room would rely. Amendment 5 rectifies that position, so a future regime could make it clear where the fitness standards would apply. When registration is rolled out later this year, spare rooms will be a separate category for registration. So future governments will know how many are being used as visitor accommodation and where they are located. That information will provide a secure basis for any future extension of a licensing regime to that form of visitor accommodation. Amendments 8, 10, 11, 16 and 26 then update references to premises throughout the bill to make clear to what they are referring in each circumstance. Amendment 17 corrects a cross-reference between sections 15 and 16. And finally, Amendment 7 updates the regulation-making power in relation to fitness for visitor accommodation to make explicit that it is limited to making provision about the general and specific fitness standards.
I have no speakers to this group, so I assume the Cabinet Secretary doesn't want to say any more. The question is that Amendment 5 be agreed to. Does any member object? No, Amendment 5 is agreed. Amendment 6, is it moved? It is. Are there any objections to Amendment 6? There are none. It's therefore agreed. Amendment 7, is it moved? It is. Are there any objections to Amendment 7? No. Amendment 8, is it moved? It is. Are there any objections to Amendment 8? No. Amendment 9, is it moved? It is. Are there any objections? There are none. Therefore, Amendment 9 is agreed. Amendment 10, is it moved? It is. Are there any objections? There are none. It's therefore agreed. Amendment 11, is it moved? By the Cabinet Secretary, it is. Are there any objections to Amendment 11? No. Amendment 11 is also agreed. We'll now move to Group 5, and the fifth group of amendments relates to provisional licences. The lead amendment is Amendment 12, and I call on the Cabinet Secretary to move that amendment.
Ensuring provisional licences are sufficiently provided for in the bill has also been a focus during its scrutiny. And this group of amendments responds to that debate and delivers on commitments made by the government earlier in the process. Amendments 38 and 39 create a new section 27, which makes explicit on the face of the bill that where an accommodation provider is registered and has done any relevant training, but does not think that the fitness standards are made in respect of their premises, they can apply for a provisional licence. Such circumstances might include, for example, where a provider is building accommodation at a new premises, or they have bought a premises within existing accommodation that needs refurbishing. In those cases, while they may not yet be able to meet all of the necessary requirements, such as a fire safety risk assessment, they may still want to advertise and take advanced bookings. This will allow them to do that, but of course they would still need to get a full licence before guests can be accepted at the premises. Amendment 38 aligns the application process for provisional licences with the processes which apply in respect of full licences. This is to support consistency with the provision of services regulations and gives greater clarity as to functions of the Welsh Ministers when determining applications for licences under this part of the bill. Amendment 39 then makes clear that a person cannot hold a full and provisional licence at the same time for the same premises, and retains a power for the Welsh Ministers to make further provision by regulations about provisional licences if that is needed in future. Amendment 12 ensures that the provisions in the bill, other than those inserted by Amendments 38 and 39, have the same effect in relation to a full licence as they do in relation to a provisional licence. Amendments 14, 21, 24, 96, 100 and 101 are consequential to Amendment 12 and provide additional clarity throughout the bill. This includes, for example, building once more on the improvements made at Stage 2 to ensure providers who have applied for a licence aren't penalised under the 31-day registration requirement under the Visitor Accommodation Register and Levy Act. Amendments 100 and 101 make clear that this applies equally whether they have applied for a full or a provisional licence. So this is another area where members, including Rhys Bowen and Sam Kurtz, have raised questions during scrutiny. I'm grateful to them both for the productive discussions we've had on this issue since stage 2. This package of amendments will place an important element of the licensing scheme on the face of the bill, and I'd ask members to support all of the amendments in this group.
Samuel Curtis.
Diolch, Llywydd. At stage 2, I tabled an amendment that would have required Welsh ministers to make provision enabling a visitor accommodation provider to apply for a provisional visitor accommodation licence. The intention was to allow a provider to advertise premises they intended to use for regulated visitor accommodation while preventing the actual provision of accommodation until the necessary approval requirements had been met and a full visitor accommodation licence had been issued. During earlier consideration, the Government provided examples of what might constitute reasonable steps in this context and indicated that further clarity would likely be provided through future guidance. I believe that Government Amendment 38, together with the associated technical amendments, goes some way towards providing that clarity which was sought. However, it may be something that needs to be revisited once the legislation is in operation. I'm incredibly grateful to the Cabinet Secretary for his collaboration between stage 2 and 3 of this, and I am content to support the amendments. Diolch.
The Cabinet Secretary to reply. No, there's no need to reply. The question is that Amendment 12 be agreed to. Does any member object? No, Amendment 12 is agreed. Group 6 is our next group of amendments, and these relate to interaction with registration, visitor accommodation, register and levy, etc. Wales Act. The lead amendment is Amendment 93, and I call on the Cabinet Secretary.
The sixth group of amendments addresses the interaction between this bill and the Visitor Accommodation Register and Levy Act, and is intended to make that interface easier for accommodation providers to navigate. In particular, these amendments address circumstances in which an accommodation provider is registered but is not actively providing or even offering accommodation. Amendments 58 and 66 make technical clarifications for that purpose. Amendments 93, 94, 95, 98, 99, 102 and 103 are a package which changes the approach to notification requirements when licensed visitor accommodation providers are not actively offering or providing accommodation. The system enables licensed accommodation providers to remain on the register and therefore keep their licence even when they are not active. These amendments provide for a simpler, less onerous approach to reporting and recording inactivity. Amendment 97 clarifies that where a registered visitor accommodation provider wants to add accommodation to their registration, they should do so by giving notice as required under Section 9 of the Visitor Accommodation Register and Levy Act. I hope members will be able to support these relatively straightforward improvements to the bill.
I have no speakers. The question, therefore, is that Amendment 93 be agreed to. Does any member object? There are no objections. Amendment 93 is agreed. Amendment 94, is it moved? It is. Are there any objections to Amendment 94? There are none. It's therefore agreed. Amendment 95, is it moved? It is. Are there any objections to Amendment 95? No. It's therefore agreed. Amendment 96, is it moved? It is. Are there any objections to Amendment 96? There are none. It's therefore agreed. Amendment 97, is it moved? It is. Are there any objections to Amendment 97? No. It's therefore agreed. Amendment 98, is it moved? It is. Are there any objections to Amendment 98? No. It's therefore agreed. Amendment 99, it's moved. Are there any objections? There are none. It's therefore agreed. Amendment 100, is it moved? It is. Are there any objections? There are none. It's therefore agreed. Amendment 101. It's moved. Are there any objections? There are none. It's therefore agreed. Amendment 102. Is it moved? It is. Are there any objections? No. Amendment 102 is agreed. Amendment 103. Is it moved? Are there any objections to Amendment 103? There are none. It's therefore agreed. Amendment 104. Is it moved? It is. Are there any objections to Amendment 104? There are none. It's therefore agreed. Amendment 13. Is it moved? It is. Are there any objections to Amendment 13? No. It's therefore agreed. Amendment 14. Is it moved? It is. Are there any objections to Amendment 14? No. It's therefore agreed. Amendment 15. Is it moved? It is. Are there any objections to Amendment 15? No. It's therefore agreed. Amendment 16. Is it moved? Yes. Are there any objections to Amendment 16? No. It's therefore agreed. Amendment 17. Is it moved? It is. Are there any objections to Amendment 17? There are none. It's therefore agreed. Amendment 18. Is it moved? It is. Are there any objections to Amendment 18? No. It's therefore agreed. Amendment 19. Is it moved? It is. Are there any objections to Amendment 19? No. It's therefore agreed. Amendment 20. Is it moved? It is. Are there any objections to Amendment 20? There are none. It's therefore agreed. Amendment 21. Is it moved? It is moved. Are there any objections to Amendment 21? No. It's therefore agreed. The seventh group of amendments relates to licences, applications. The lead amendment in the group is Amendment 22, and I call on the Cabinet Secretary to move the lead amendment.
I referred in discussing Group 5 to the provision of services regulations, a subject with which members involved in Stage 2 scrutiny were obliged to become familiar. The bill so far has not distinguished between an application fee and a licence fee. However, this is a distinction made under the provision of services regulations. Amendments 27 and 28, alongside Amendment 22, introduce that distinction into this bill. These changes therefore ensure that an unsuccessful application attracts only a fee for the application process itself. This is the same approach taken by Rent Smart Wales and is part of the government's wish to make the application process as fair, straightforward and accessible as possible. As a result of the amendments in this group, all of the powers of the Welsh Ministers to grant or refuse an application have been brought together in a new Section 20, and any further assessment process is all contained in Section 21. Amendment 28 emphasises that inspections as part of the further assessment process can only be undertaken with the agreement of the accommodation provider. It replaces the meaning of authorised person, bringing it forward from sections 30 and 31 to make explicit that an applicant is entitled to expect a person conducting an inspection to have written authorisation to do so. Amendments 43 and 46 then make the consequential changes to remove that definition from sections 30 and 31. Finally, in this group, Amendments 29 and 57 update other references in the bill to grants of licences since, as a result of Amendments 27 and 28, all full licences will be awarded under Section 20. Ask members to support all amendments in this group.
I have no speakers, so the question is that Amendment 22 be agreed to. No. Amendment 22 is agreed. Cabinet Secretary, Amendment 23, is it moved? Are there any objections to Amendment 23? There are none. It's therefore agreed. Amendment 24, is it moved? It is moved. Are there any objections? No. Amendment 24 is agreed. Amendment 25, is it moved? Are there any objections to Amendment 25? There are none. It's therefore agreed. Amendment 26, is it moved? It is. Are there any objections to Amendment 26? There are none. It's agreed. Amendment 27, is it moved? It is. Are there any objections? There are none. Amendment 27 is agreed. Amendment 28, is it moved? It is. Are there any objections? There are none. It's therefore agreed. Amendment 29, is it moved? It is moved. Are there any objections to Amendment 29? There are none. It's therefore agreed. The 8th group of amendments is next, and these relate to licences, enforcement and appeals. Amendment 30 is the lead amendment in this group, and I call on the Cabinet Secretary to move the amendments.
There will be occasions when the licensing authority will need to take enforcement action. The amendments in this group make further provision about enforcement to make it clearer about to whom the requirements or offences apply and when. These amendments ensure rights of appeal are sufficiently broad, making changes to the sections on inspections, and move provisions about information notices and providing false and misleading information to Part 5 of the bill. Amendment 30 makes explicit that if a notice is served revoking a licence, that notice must explain any right of appeal. Amendment 31 makes clear the circumstances where the Welsh ministers can issue a warning that a licence may be revoked. That is to say, if a condition that has previously been breached is breached again. Amendment 33 provides a broader power in respect of appeals and aligns the provision with other similar powers elsewhere in the bill. This is so that regulations can ensure the remedial and revocation process works properly. Amendment 32 is then consequential to remove the reference to appeals from earlier in the section. Amendment 40 broadens the provision in the bill about rights of appeal to make explicit that any decision in relation to the grant or revocation of a licence can be appealed by the person to whom notice of the decision was given. Amendments 41, 51, 81 and 82 move the power to issue information notices and the corresponding offence to Part 5 of the bill to reflect their more general nature and the overarching application to Welsh ministers' functions under Parts 3, 4 and 5 of the bill. Amendments 52 and 83 do the same for the offence of providing false or misleading information. Amendment 83 also expands the defence to that offence to any information provided to the Welsh ministers under Parts 3, 4 and 5 of the bill. That means that wherever information or a document is provided, a person has a defence if they declare at the time that they know it is or may be false or misleading. Amendment 42 makes clear, for the avoidance of doubt, that an inspection could be triggered to look either into false or misleading information being provided or into a licence breach. Amendment 44 is another minor clarification for consistency with provision elsewhere in the bill. Amendments 45 and 48 ensure the inspection powers in Section 30 and 31 and the offence of false and misleading information work as intended. They make clear that while an inspector can still inspect, copy and take away documents, the inspector cannot require a person actively to provide the documents during an inspection. This is to avoid the risk of someone committing an offence simply because they did not have time during the inspection to consider whether it might be false or misleading before providing it. Amendment 47 removes some unnecessary words from Section 31. And finally, for this group, Amendments 53 to 55 update the offence of willful obstruction. These amendments make a distinction between those inspections taking place under a warrant and those without. In each case, someone may be committing an offence if they obstruct the authorised person inspecting the premises. Where there is a warrant, any person would commit an offence by willfully obstructing the execution of the warrant to inspect the premises. However, where there is no warrant, only the licence holder or a person involved in or helping with the provision of visitor accommodation at the premises would commit the offence. So the amendments in this group make provisions in the bill about enforcement and appeals clearer. They reinforce the rights of appeal and are designed to make sure that accommodation providers are fully appraised of the rights that they possess in this part of the bill. I ask members to support them.
I have no speakers, so the question is that Amendment 30 be agreed to. Does any member object? No. Amendment 30 is agreed. Is Amendment 31 moved by the Cabinet Secretary? Yes, it is. Is there any objection to Amendment 31? No. So Amendment 31 is agreed. Amendment 32, is it moved? Yes, it's moved. Is there any objection to Amendment 32? No. It's agreed, therefore. Amendment 33, is it moved? Yes, it is. Is there objection to Amendment 33? No. It's therefore agreed. Group 9 is the next group. These relate to licences and renewals. Amendment 34 is the lead amendment, and the Cabinet Secretary to move this amendment.
So this group makes updates to section 25 of the bill about licence periods and renewal of licences to complete the changes made at stage 2 and to reflect the position reached after committee scrutiny. Amendment 34 clarifies that the power of the Welsh ministers to prescribe different licence periods, as inserted into the bill during stage 2, is equivalent to other regulation-making powers under this chapter. It allows for different provision to be made in different cases, such as by reference to the type of premises or the regulated accommodation provided by the visitor accommodation provider. Amendment 36 does the same thing in respect of the power to make regulations about renewal of licences. It also makes it clear that these regulations may set out the application process for renewals, but reiterates the requirement that regulations must provide visitor accommodation providers with the opportunity to maintain continuity of business during the renewal process. Amendment 35 is consequential to that change. Diolch.
I have no speakers for this group. Therefore, is there objection to Amendment 34? No. Amendment 34 is agreed. Amendment 35, is it moved? Yes, it's moved. Is there objection? No. And Amendment 35 is agreed. Amendment 36, is it moved? Yes, it is. Is there objection? No. And so it's agreed. Group 10 is the next group of amendments, and these relate to application of the Act to special cases. Amendment 37 is the lead amendment. I call on the Cabinet Secretary to move this amendment.
The amendments in this group reflect the reality of providing visitor accommodation and are intended to support business continuity. These cases include transfers of licences, what happens when licensed visitor accommodation is being refurbished, and exemptions from licensing requirements. I turn first to amendments 73 and 75, 76, 77 and 78. All of these amendments address transfers of licences. Amendments dealing with these issues were moved at stage 2 by Sam Kurtz and have been subject of discussion with the industry as well. The government amendments in this group aim to respond to these concerns. Amendment 73 makes explicit that regulations addressing cases of death, incapacity or insolvency of an accommodation provider may also provide for transfers of licences and associated procedures. Amendments 75 to 78 amend section 53 of the bill to align with section 52 and to ensure provision can be made for the transfer or sale of a premises, even when that is not as part of a sale or transfer of a business. This is intended to provide greater certainty when regulated visitor accommodation changes hands, both for the existing and new providers and businesses. Amendments 72, 74 and 79 make it explicit that, in the special circumstances I have just set out, regulations can ensure an offence under the bill is not committed. This will allow, for example, temporary arrangements to be put in place to support business continuity following the death or incapacity of a visitor accommodation provider. This will, of course, also support the continuity of provision of accommodation to visitors in such unusual circumstances. Amendment 37 expands on Section 26, providing that regulations about amendment of licences can include similar arrangements to provisional licences. This means that someone can keep their licence even if they can't meet the fitness standards while they are refurbishing, as long as they don't let guests stay at that accommodation until it is made fit again. The amendment also allows regulations to make provision about appeals, to be clear that there should be rights of appeal in circumstances where there is a judgment to be made in relation to a licence amendment. Amendments 59 and 80 replace the regulation-making power in Section 37 in relation to exemptions with a specific power to disapply the offences in Sections 32 and 47 and the contractual requirement in Section 42 in specified cases. The revised power retains the ability to exempt a person from both licensing and advertising requirements where they are not required to register under the Visitor Accommodation Register and Levy Act. The new power also allows for the offences and contract requirement to be disapplied in a wider range of circumstances. This is intended to put beyond doubt the ability to meet the commitments made during scrutiny that arrangements will be put in place so that when an existing provider has applied for a licence by the deadline, they will be able to continue operating until their licence application has been determined. Finally, this change would also allow regulations to provide for time-limited exemptions for specific events. We have recently seen in Scotland that a temporary exemption from their licensing regime has been put in place for the Commonwealth Games. We have the Tour de France coming to Wales next year, and Wales has been an attractive destination for other one-off international events in the past. The effect of Amendment 80 is to ensure that capacity to process licence applications won't be a barrier to hosting major events in Wales, and, while not the primary purpose, would allow the Senedd to decide in future whether there is a case for allowing exemptions for these or any other purposes or circumstances. To summarise, Llywydd, as I mentioned at the beginning of this group, all the amendments here are intended first and foremost to support business continuity and allow the licensing scheme to reflect the reality and variety of circumstances which providers face. And I ask members to support them.
Samuel Kurtz.
At stage 2, I tabled an amendment that sought to ensure that any visitor accommodation licence granted could be freely transferred, provided that the visitor accommodation provider was not in breach of any licence conditions and that the transferee had not previously had a visitor accommodation licence revoked in respect of another premises. I raised this amendment to provide clarity and certainty for operators, particularly where a property or business is transferred as a going concern. I'm pleased that the government amendments in this group, Amendments 75 to 77, now go a considerable way towards addressing these concerns. Amendment 75 allows regulations to make provision about the circumstances in which regulated visitor accommodation may be transferred between providers. Amendment 76 clarifies that regulations may make provision relating to the transfer of premises or the transfer of a business as a going concern. And Amendment 77 makes clear that regulations under this section may specify both the circumstances in which the transfer of visitor accommodation licenses can take place and the process associated with those transfers. Taken together, these amendments provide a clearer framework for the transfer of licences, and I'm therefore content with the government has responded constructively to the concerns raised at stage 2, and I'm grateful for the Cabinet Secretary's part in that. Diolch.
Does the Cabinet Secretary wish to reply?
The circumstances dealt with in Group 10 of amendments are unusual circumstances and required a lot of thought and some technical adjustment to the rules. And I'm grateful to Sam Kurtz for the way in which he raised these matters at stage 2 and for the opportunity to continue discussions with him to arrive at a position where I think the bill will now better reflect the practical circumstances in which these unusual arrangements have to be navigated.
Okay, hold on tight.
We have a number of votes in this group. The question is that Amendment 37 be agreed to. Does any member object? No. Amendment 37 is agreed. Amendment 38, is it moved? It is. Are there any objections to Amendment 38? No. It's therefore agreed. Amendment 39, is it moved? It is. Are there any objections to Amendment 39? No. It's therefore agreed. Amendment 40, is it moved? It is. Are there any objections to Amendment 40? No. It's therefore agreed. Amendment 41, it is moved. Are there any objections to Amendment 41? There are none. It's therefore agreed. Amendment 42, is it moved? It is. Are there any objections to Amendment 42? No. It's therefore agreed. Amendment 43, is it moved? It is. Are there any objections to Amendment 43? There are none. It's therefore agreed. Amendment 44, is it moved? It is. Are there any objections? There are none. It's therefore agreed. Amendment 45, is it moved? It is. Are there any objections to Amendment 45? No. It's therefore agreed. Amendment 46. Are there any objections? Is it moved, rather? It is. Are there any objections? No. It's therefore agreed. Amendment 47. Is it moved? It is. Are there any objections? No. It's therefore agreed. Amendment 48. Is it moved? It is. Are there any objections? There are none. It's therefore agreed. Amendment 49. Is it moved? It is. Are there any objections? There are none. It's therefore agreed. Amendment 50. Is it moved? It is moved. Are there any objections? There are none. It's therefore agreed. Amendment 51. Is it moved? It is. Are there any objections? There are none. It's therefore agreed. Amendment 52. Is it moved? It is. Are there any objections? There are none. It's therefore agreed. Amendment 53. Is it moved? It is. Are there any objections? No. It's therefore agreed. Amendment 54. Is it moved? It is. Are there any objections? No. It's therefore agreed. Amendment 55. Is it moved? It is. Are there any objections to Amendment 55? No. It's therefore agreed. Amendment 56. Is it moved? It is. Are there any objections to Amendment 56? No. It's therefore agreed. 57. Is it moved? It is. Are there any objections? There are none. Amendment 57 is agreed. Amendment 58. Is it moved? It is. Are there any objections to Amendment 58? No. It's therefore agreed. Amendment 59. Is it moved? It is. Are there any objections to Amendment 59? No. It's therefore agreed. Amendment 60. Is it moved? It is. Are there any objections to Amendment 60? No. It's therefore agreed. Amendment 61. Is it moved? It is. Are there any objections? There are none. The amendment is therefore agreed. Amendment 62. Is it moved? It is. Are there any objections? There are none. Amendment 62 is agreed. Amendment 63. Is it moved? It is. Are there any objections to Amendment 63? No. It's therefore agreed. Amendment 64. Is it moved? It is. Are there any objections to Amendment 64? No. It's therefore agreed. Amendment 65. Is it moved? It is. Are there any objections? There are none. It's therefore agreed. Amendment 66. Is it moved? It is. Are there any objections? No. It's therefore agreed. Amendment 67. Is it moved? It is. Are there objections? No. It's therefore agreed. Amendment 68. Is it moved? It is. Are there any objections to Amendment 68? No. It's therefore agreed. Amendment 69. Is it moved? It is. Are there any objections to Amendment 69? No. It's therefore agreed. Amendment 70. Is it moved? It is. Are there any objections to Amendment 70? No. It's therefore agreed. Amendment 71. Is it moved? It is. Are there any objections to Amendment 71? No. It's therefore agreed. Amendment 72. Is it moved? It is. Are there any objections to Amendment 72? No, it's therefore agreed. Amendment 73, is it moved? Are there any objections to Amendment 73? No, it's therefore agreed. Amendment 74, is it moved? It is. Are there any objections? No, it's therefore agreed. Amendment 75, is it moved? It is. Are there any objections? There are none, it's therefore agreed. Amendment 77, is it moved? Yes, it's moved. Are there any objections? There are none, it's therefore agreed. Amendment 78, is it moved? Yes, are there any objections? No, it's therefore agreed. Amendment 79, is it moved? It is. Are there any objections? There are none, it's therefore agreed. Amendment 80, is it moved? It is. Are there any objections? No, it's therefore agreed. Amendment 81, is it moved? It is. Are there any objections? No, it's therefore agreed. Amendment 82, is it moved? It is. Are there any objections to Amendment 82? There are none, it's therefore agreed. Amendment 83, is it moved? It is. Are there any objections to Amendment 83? No, it's therefore agreed. Amendment 84, is it moved? It is. Are there any objections? There are none, it's therefore agreed. Amendment 85, is it moved? It is. Are there any objections? There are none, it's therefore agreed. Amendment 86, is it moved? It is. Are there any objections to Amendment 86? No, it's therefore agreed. So we'll move to our 11th group of amendments, and these relate to procedures and interpretation. Amendment 87 is the lead amendment, and I call on the Cabinet Secretary to move the amendment.
Amendments updates the sections about procedure which are contained at the end of the bill. The Government accepted all the recommendations of Stage 1 committee reports to expand Senedd oversight of regulation-making powers in the bill and made corresponding changes at Stage 2. Amendments 87, 88 and 89 continue that same approach, further reflecting advice of Senedd committees. Amendment 90 and 91 update the interpretation section of the bill to make references to visitor accommodation licence and provisional licences clear throughout the bill. Amendment 92 updates the list of powers to be commenced in 2029 as a result of other government amendments which have been debated this afternoon, and add regulations about licence amendments into that list. I ask members to support all amendments in this group.
I have no speakers, so the question is that Amendment 87 be agreed to. Does any member object? No. Amendment 87 is therefore agreed. Amendment 88, is it moved? Yes, it is. Is there objection to Amendment 88? No. Therefore, it's agreed. Amendment 89, is it moved? Yes, it's moved. Is there any objection? No. Therefore, Amendment 89 is agreed. Amendment 90, is it moved? Yes, it's moved. Is there objection to Amendment 90? No. Therefore, it's agreed. Amendment 91, is it moved? Yes, it's moved. Is there objection to Amendment 91? No. Amendment 106, is it moved? Yes, it's moved by Sam Kurtz. The question is that Amendment 106 be agreed to. Does any member object? There is objection. Therefore, we will proceed to a vote on Amendment 106. Open the vote. Close the vote. In favour, 13. No abstentions. 39 against. Therefore, Amendment 106 is not agreed, which means that we reach Group 12 of amendments, and these relate to coming into force. Amendment 107 is the main amendment, and I call on Sam Coates to move the lead amendment.
Llywydd, as this is the final group of amendments, before I move the amendment, I want to begin by reiterating my thanks to the Senedd's clerking and legal team for their support throughout this process. I also want to place on record my thanks to Tom Livesey in the Welsh Conservative Group Office, who has been working tirelessly with members of my own team to help draft and scrutinise the legislation that the Welsh Government has brought forward. I've worked closely with the Professional Association of Self-Caterers, Airbnb and many others on this bill, and I'm grateful for the support and engagement that they have provided, as well as from a number of private providers who have contributed their perspectives to ensure their views are reflected in this process. I'm also grateful to the constructive and open approach that the Cabinet Secretary has taken in engaging with me on the amendments we have tabled. I would also like to acknowledge Luke Fletcher and Rhys Owen, who tabled amendments earlier in the process that sought to improve this bill. I do still have some concerns about aspects of the legislation. However, I recognise that the bill has been strengthened throughout the legislative process. Ultimately, it will be for the next Welsh Government to implement it, and I hope that the next Senedd will continue to scrutinise its operation closely and make improvements where necessary once it is in force. So turning finally to Amendment 107. This amendment would make the commencement of the majority of the bill subject to Senedd approval. This proposal was raised during Stage 1 scrutiny, and while I respect the Cabinet Secretary's arguments against it, I continue to believe that it represents a sensible safeguard, particularly given the pace at which this legislation has progressed. The legislative process for this bill has moved quickly, and it is responsible to ensure that a future government is not bound by decisions taken under these circumstances. I do not share the Cabinet Secretary's concern that this could set a precedent whereby a future Senedd might simply refuse to commence primary legislation passed by this Senedd. In fact, it is precisely that possibility of democratic oversight that makes this amendment important to retain. For that reason, I urge members to support Amendment 107 to ensure that the 7th Senedd retains its ability to properly scrutinise the legislation made in this place. Diolch, Llywydd.
Luke Fletcher.
Diolch, Llywydd, and of course, as this is the last group now, I would echo many of the thanks that Sam Coates has given to the clerking team, to the Cabinet Secretary and his team, to Gwion and Kira in the Plaid Cymru offices, and again reiterating the thanks for the work that the cooperation agreement team had done on this, with Sian and Adam and Kevin leading the way on that. I think the bill puts us in a very strong position going forward. I think it will allow us to create policy for the tourism sector on the basis of having data to back up why we're making those policy decisions, and that's something that we shouldn't forget, which is a strength with this particular bill. In relation to Amendment 106, I've mentioned previously throughout the progress of this bill why I don't think actually delaying commencement is necessarily the right way forward. I think it's fair to say that the sector and those visitors need clarity going forward as to what the position will be. Commencement will only muddy the water around that. I will say I am sympathetic with how the sector is feeling with the number of legislation that has gone to affect that sector. I think we can all be sympathetic with that particular point. I will say though, and I think the Cabinet Secretary has said previously, and I'm being reminded by my by Sian Gwyllian to my left. Of course, conversations around this particular bill started back in 2021. Now, we can argue about how much consultation has gone on. I think the right level of consultation has gone on throughout this process. But let's not forget actually what this bill does. It puts us in a strong position. It gives us the data that we need to make those informed decisions going forward when it comes to the tourism sector. And for that reason, we'll be opposing Amendment 106 and will support the bill going forward.
The Cabinet Secretary, Mark Drakeford.
Llywydd, well, as you've heard, Amendment 107 seeks to make commencement orders for the bill subject to the Senedd approval process. It's been debated already at stages 1 and at stage 2, and every time I've set out why I cannot accept that proposition. I reject the suggestion that the bill has been developed at speed, as Luke Fletcher just said. This bill has been part of the government's programme since the last election. It was part of the cooperation agreement programme, part of the programme for government, and a companion piece to that visitor levy bill, which was extensively debated here on the floor of the Senedd. I continue to have serious concerns about the idea that a future Senedd could simply refuse to commence primary legislation passed by this Senedd. These concerns were highlighted in a powerful contribution by Sian Gwenllian during the Stage 1 plenary debate. Such an amendment would allow that future Senedd to prevent implementation of primary legislation passed by this Senedd through what is essentially a procedural device. Now, of course, it will be the right of that future Senedd to decide not to go ahead with legislation. But the right form of democratic oversight is not an amendment on commencement in this bill, but a future Senedd using the full primary legislative scrutiny process to undo what has been done through the full primary legislative process in this Senedd. The passage of the amendment, as well as being constitutionally objectionable, would frustrate the implementation of the scheme, reduce the certainty for tourism businesses, risk wasteful spending on developing a scheme that might not be brought into force, and risk undermining the principles of the bill as agreed by this Senedd at Stage 2. Llywydd, despite the government's objection to this amendment, I too wanted to echo what others have said in this final group of amendments. I'm very pleased to say today, as I've said every time I've been involved in legislation, that I've never seen legislation on the floor of the Senedd that wasn't improved by the scrutiny process. That has been certainly true of this bill in the evidence taken by committees at Stage 1, by the way in which Stage 2 amendments were debated, and the space that has been created to bring forward government amendments to respond to some of the points that were raised by other parties and other members then. I'm grateful to them all, and grateful for the support the bill has received this afternoon.
Samuel Kurtz,
Samuel Kurtz to reply.
And, I think it's quite right to, as Luke Fletcher has done, to acknowledge the legislative fatigue that the sector has been under in the 5 years previously. And I note the point that he made, that from here on in we will have the ability to make policy off of data collected within the tourism sector. The irony being that this is the last piece of legislation affecting tourism that's being brought forward, when really it should have been the first piece of legislation impacting on the tourism levy and on 182 nights. So there's a little bit of cart before horse here in that sense. But going forward, Luke Fletcher is quite right that the sector can now look towards legislation being created on data collected within the sector that it is being represented. And yes, it's right for the Cabinet Secretary and for Luke Fletcher to highlight that this was part of the programme for government and the cooperation agreement. But that doesn't substitute the actual work of the Senedd and Senedd committees. And the Cabinet Secretary is absolutely right. Legislation has been improved by scrutiny throughout this session, but I do still feel that this has been rushed at the tail end of the 5th year of the Senedd term, where on the points that I've highlighted previously as why it should have been earlier in the legislative process, given the fatigue that the sector is facing. However, I am grateful for the collaborative working between all parties in this, and thank you very much, Llywydd.
Amendment 107. If Amendment 107 is agreed, Amendment 92 falls. The question is that Amendment 107 is agreed. Does any member object? There is objection. We will therefore move to a vote on Amendment 107. Open the vote. Close the vote. In favour 13, no abstentions, 39 against. Therefore, Amendment 107 is not agreed. Amendment 92, is it moved by the Cabinet Secretary? It is. With a smile, and therefore we will ask if there is any objection to the amendment. There is no objection, and therefore the amendment is agreed. which means that we have reached the end of our Stage 3 consideration of the Development of Tourism and Regulation of Visitor Accommodation Wales Bill, and I declare that all sections and schedules of the bill are deemed agreed. That concludes our proceedings for today.